Daenerys Targaryen stood atop the walls of the city, her silver-white hair twisting in the wind that carried the scent of sea salt and cinders. Dawn had only just broken over the horizon, casting a pale light across the sprawl of King's Landing below, gilding the rooftops in a golden hue that felt like a promise. She had dreamt of this moment for so long, taking the Iron Throne, righting the wrongs done to her house, shattering the chains of oppression across the lands. She had come to the city, once the seat of her ancestors, determined to bring a new dawn for Westeros, a peace she believed she could win without the cost of innocent lives. The battle seemed imminent. The silence that fell over the capital was thick, a pregnant hush in which every soldier, every man, woman, and child braced themselves for the next sound, the roar of dragons, the clash of steel, the thunder of war. The Red Keep loomed in the distance, a silent sentinel perched upon Aegon's high hill, and Daenerys could almost feel the stones of that ancient fortress calling to her with the voices of her forebears. There was a time she would have set the city ablaze in her anger. She had once believed fear was the only coin the ruthless understood. But many things had changed. The paths she tread had forced her to question her own heart and revisit the notion of mercy. She had not come here to be a butcher of the innocent, and she had not come here to replicate the cruelties of those she had once hated. She meant to prove to the realm and to herself that a dragon queen did not need to be a tyrant. In the weeks since she had arrived and set her armies on the outskirts of King's Landing, she had sent word to the people urging them to flee, to find shelter beyond the city's walls if they could, or to barricade themselves far from the Red Keep if they could not. She knew that illusions of a bloodless victory were often fantasies in the Game of Thrones, but she was determined to do everything in her power to minimize the innocent toll. The day before, her generals and advisors had gathered around a table in the makeshift command tent outside the city gates. There had been disagreements and doubts. Some had seen fear and brutality as the quickest path to victory, but Daenerys, standing tall and lit from behind by a brazier's dancing light, would not be swayed from her plan. She wanted the Lannister troops to know there was an alternative to dying for a queen who had shown them little loyalty. She wanted them to see that there was no reason to defend the monstrous policies of Cersei Lannister, and so she commanded her advisors to spread the word far and wide by captured messengers or catapulted letters. "Defect," she declared, "and you shall be spared. Put down your swords, open the gates, let the city breathe free." So that morning, an uncertain hush lingering over the entire field, she watched the sunrise as a herald of possibility. Her silver hair caught the first rays of light like a molten halo. She felt a steadiness fill her bones, and she resolved that she would be the queen she had always intended to be, a breaker of chains, not a destroyer of hope. Somewhere behind her, the armies of the Unsullied formed in perfect lines under Grey Worm's vigilant command, their spears upright, their discipline like a drawn bowstring waiting to be loosed. Off to the side, the Dothraki prepared themselves as well, the restless stamping of their horses carrying across the field in low rumbles. And above all, the great beast Drogon perched, snorting softly, sensing his mother's tension. When she finally led the march toward King's Landing, her posture was regal, her stride measured. She had chosen to walk at the head of her army. Usually, she might have flown in on Dragonback, but it was important that the defenders see her as a flesh and blood leader who wished to spare the city. The banners of House Targaryen snapped against the breeze, the three-headed dragon a haunting memory of conquest past and present. With Daenerys at their forefront, the Unsullied and the Dothraki advanced as one formidable host. Overhead, droves of startled pigeons fled the ramparts, and the few watchers on the walls trembled at the approach of this unstoppable force. If any Lannister soldiers were peering over the battlements, and surely some were, they would see what they had been warned about, the arrival of the Dragon Queen who had burned the slavers of Essos, who had liberated Meereen, Yunkai, and Astapor, who had forged alliances and brought Dorne and the North to her cause. Perhaps they expected to see a ruthless conqueror that day, but Daenerys intended to show them more than that. She was the Dragonblood, yes, but also the woman who had fought to end atrocities, who had walked through fire and lived to champion the downtrodden. By the time they reached the outer walls of King's Landing, the gates remained sealed. Daenerys, flanked by Grey Worm and Ser Davos, who served as her envoy to the city's defenders, halted her forces in a grand display. Trumpets sounded, summoning any Lannister or Gold Cloak commander who might be willing to negotiate. The city had been told that if they surrendered, they would be safe, and Daenerys wanted to make it clear she meant every word. She stood with wind tousling her hair, eyes bright as she gazed upon the ramparts. At her signal, Ser Davos stepped forward, raised a horn, and blew a resounding note that echoed across the stony expanse. Daenerys waited, the hush returning. She half expected no response. That had been Cersei's style, to force a battle rather than yield an inch. But after a tense moment, the gates ground open a fraction and a single Lannister knight rode forward on a gray stallion. He was not one she recognized by name, but he wore the colors of House Lannister. She remembered well the look of caution and fear in his eyes when he halted, some 20 yards from her front line. Grey Worm and Ser Davos were ready, but Daenerys lifted a staying hand. She addressed him, voice echoing. "You have heard my terms. I do not wish to harm the city or its people. I do not wish to harm any soldier who does not bear arms against me. Let your queen stand down, surrender the Red Keep, and I swear no innocent blood shall be spilled." The knight was shaking, but his grip on the reins was sure. He spoke in a ragged tone, loud enough for her and the others to hear. He explained that they were loyal soldiers and he had no authority over Cersei's decisions. But he implored Daenerys to let them see if a parley could still be arranged, if there was a way to avoid the bloodshed of a final siege. Daenerys, with her heart pounding, nodded and granted it. She allowed the knight to retreat back behind the walls. She gave him 1 hour. If no response came, she would do what she must. Silence once again fell over the field as the hour grew long. Daenerys could almost taste the tension in the air, that sense that an entire war hinged on the next few minutes. The men behind her stood ready for battle. Even she, for all her talk of mercy, knew that if Cersei refused to yield, she would have to proceed as planned. Time trickled slowly, every heartbeat a distant drum, until finally a new sound reached their ears, the groan of gates opening once more. A small retinue emerged, a white flag of truce flapping above them. The hush in Daenerys' army broke with the faintest breath of relief. She saw the faces of her men, stony but hopeful. When the retinue approached, Daenerys recognized one among them, Qyburn, the queen's hand. He appeared grim, his black robes dragging over the dirt, but his eyes were as calculating as ever. He took measure of Daenerys and her entire host in that single, creeping glance. "Her Grace the Queen, Cersei of the House Lannister," Qyburn began, voice quavering with the effort to project authority, "offers negotiation on condition that you withdraw your armies and present yourself alone in the Red Keep for terms." Daenerys felt the jolt of anger. It was a brazen demand, given that her forces far outnumbered those within the city. Yet she did not lash out. Instead, she kept her voice level, controlled. "I will not walk alone into your keep, Qyburn. My advisors remain at my side. Your queen is in no position to dictate terms. Tell her that if she refuses to surrender, we will take the Red Keep, but we will do it in a way that spares the people of King's Landing. I will not harm the innocent because she refuses to see reason." For a moment, Qyburn's lips twitched, perhaps with the urge to sneer or to speak further, but he said nothing more. He inclined his head in a curt gesture, then turned his horse around. Daenerys could see frustration in his bearing as he departed. She listened to the fading clop of hooves on the old road that led back to the gates. Her heart pounded. When next the gates opened, no retinue rode out. Instead, Daenerys heard the groaning of pulleys, the shifting of mechanisms, and realized with dawning understanding that scorpion bolts, massive spear-like weapons designed to pierce dragon hide, were being readied along the ramparts. The Lannisters were rejecting her final offer. A wave of adrenaline laced with sorrow rippled through her. She turned to Grey Worm, whose face was set, and gave the smallest nod. He raised his spear, and the Unsullied wrapped their shields in unison. The signal was given, the order to march. Daenerys glanced up, her eyes searching for Drogon. The black dragon soared overhead, letting out a thunderous roar that shook men's hearts. This was it. She lifted her head high, calling out so that all her host could hear, "Forward, steady. Offer them one last chance to yield. But if they attack us, defend yourselves, and hold the city's people harmless. Anyone who drops their arms is to be spared." They advanced. The pounding of boots and hooves echoed across the open ground. Daenerys stood poised, an imposing presence in the midst of her protective retinue, as she moved with them. It was a surreal moment. The city walls felt so near now, the shadows of its ramparts looming over them. She could make out the faint shapes of men crouched behind their scorpions, the fletching of arrows bristling upon the parapets. She felt tension coil in her stomach, the dread of what might happen if the Lannister archers and scorpion crews loosed their fury. But no volley came just yet. Instead, an eerie standoff extended for what felt like a small eternity. Daenerys saw men among the defenders who wore the Lannister lion but whose eyes darted nervously, glancing behind them as though wishing to flee. The city's main gate had just begun to reopen, perhaps an accident of war, or perhaps someone within tried to signal a surrender. She couldn't be certain. The next instant, a single scorpion bolt cut through the air and crashed to the ground in front of the Unsullied, sending dust and shards of cobblestone flying. That was the Lannisters' answer. A direct attack. Grey Worm barked orders, and a phalanx of Unsullied formed a protective shield wall. The time for offers had ended. Daenerys could not risk Drogon yet. The scorpions along the battlements were too many. A direct flight would make him a target. As her men advanced, archers from her side responded, letting arrows fly toward the battlements. The Lannister scorpions cranked and fired again, but the thick rank of Unsullied advanced steadily, using large, reinforced siege mantlets for protection. Here and there, the clang of iron and dull thuds sounded as massive bolts impacted the wooden mantlets. Some men cried out, pinned to the earth by bolts larger than a man's arm. Despite these casualties, the Unsullied ranks did not falter. They marched on, step by disciplined step, unstoppable in their devotion to their queen and their cause. When they reached the edge of the gate, the Lannister defenders atop the walls rained arrows, and Daenerys motioned for her men to stand clear of the main opening. She raised a hand in a sweeping gesture. In response, the Dothraki, led by a brazen khal, surged forward on their horses. They galloped around the walls to another approach, focusing on a section that was less defended by scorpions. Their thunderous approach forced the city defenders to redirect their scorpion bolts. For a moment, the Dothraki feigned a retreat, drawing more attention away. Seizing that opportunity, Grey Worm called forth the Unsullied sappers who carried heavy rams. They began pounding at the gates, each strike reverberating through Daenerys' core, each crash a direct challenge to Cersei's obstinacy. Finally, with a tortured groan, the main gate shuddered and gave way. The Unsullied poured in. Daenerys, flanked by her closest guard, followed them into King's Landing. Here, the narrow streets and tall buildings made scorpion shots more difficult, but arrows still whistled overhead. She heard the screams of frightened citizens, the chaos of a city under siege. Her heart wrenched in her chest. Was there a way to keep them all safe? She could see men, women, and children fleeing into alleyways, some carrying all they owned, some carrying nothing at all. The battle lines parted around them as Daenerys had commanded. Any unarmed small folk were allowed to flee. The Unsullied did not cut them down, they moved as a disciplined wave toward the city center. Soldiers in Lannister colors met them at some intersections, steel on steel, but these skirmishes were small pockets of desperate resistance. Daenerys herself rode in behind her forces astride a white mare that Ser Jorah once gifted her. She watched as more Lannister men dropped their swords then raised them. Some knelt in the streets. Others retreated, unwilling to die for a queen who had offered them no quarter in the past. At one point, Daenerys passed by a group of Lannister archers who had simply laid down their bows and raised their hands. The Unsullied parted around them, binding them but not killing them, as per her edict. Another group, uncertain, half surrendered, half ran. Daenerys witnessed it all with wide eyes, hoping every life spared was a step toward healing the realm. Yet there were places in the city where the bloodshed could not be avoided. Lannister loyalists who believed Daenerys was a foreign invader fought with savage desperation. Some unleashed oil from above and flung torches down, igniting patches of the city in small bursts of flame. Others loosed arrow after arrow, hoping to fell as many invaders as they could before the onrush of unstoppable force reached them. But the tide was turning faster than Daenerys or Cersei could have anticipated. The people were not on Cersei's side. The city had known too many famines, too many brutal crackdowns, and when faced with a new power, one that promised mercy, they did not rally behind their queen. They either fled or stood aside. Bit by bit, street by street, Daenerys advanced toward the Red Keep. She felt a flicker of guilt each time she passed a building wreathed in fire or a corner awash in blood, but she reminded herself that she had done everything to prevent this, that she had offered surrender and safe passage, that she had not unleashed Drogon upon the city. This was war, and war was never clean. Yet she took solace in the realization that casualties among the innocent, so far, seemed fewer than she had feared. Word was spreading that the invaders were sparing anyone who did not fight. That knowledge blunted the fiercest edges of the battle. When Daenerys' host reached the broad square before the Red Keep, a new challenge arose. The fortress had been sealed from within, massive portcullises lowered, doors barred, scorpions perched on every vantage point. Across the square, the last large contingent of Lannister men, those sworn to defend the keep at all costs, had arrayed in a final stand. Their crimson cloaks fluttered, the golden lion on their chests shining dully in the half-light. Daenerys paused, letting her unsullied fan out. She could see no small folk here, only soldiers. Good. This would be the decisive confrontation. Her eyes lifted to the parapets of the keep. She saw no sign of Cersei, but she could sense the woman behind those walls, perhaps watching from a tower window. Daenerys inhaled deeply, feeling the old Targaryen fire in her veins. She could unleash Drogon now, send him to burn the scorpions, tear open the fortress, and bring the fortress crashing down. But she knew that if she tried to take the keep from the skies, those scorpions might kill her last living dragon. Drogon was powerful yet vulnerable under a massed hail of bolts. Besides, there was something about seeing these last defenders, a ring of steel around the seat of Lannister power, that made Daenerys hesitate. Could she still coax them to surrender? She nodded to Ser Davos, who stood close by. He stepped forward, raising a gloved hand. "Lay down your arms," he called. "You've seen the city has not burned. You've seen that your brothers who yield are spared. We don't want your blood. Surrender, and the Queen will show you mercy." At first, a hush followed, as if even the stone walls were listening. Then one Lannister captain, an older man with a jagged scar across his cheek, barked back, "We fight for our queen. You'll get no mercy from us, Targaryen." Daenerys felt a pang of sadness that was quickly replaced by resolve. If these men had decided to stand to the last, she had given them every chance. She turned, gazing up at Drogon circling overhead, roaring in challenge. But unleashing the dragon so close to the city, with the city still full of people behind them, was fraught with risk. One wild blast of dragon fire could spread uncontrollably among the wooden houses. She clenched her fists on her reins. She would have to take the keep by land. The scorpions would still be a threat if Drogon got too near. But what if she attacked in a controlled way? She had thought it all through with her generals, a surgical strike on the keep's foundations aimed precisely to bring it down from within, collapsing only the structure itself, leaving the city around it untouched. It would be an enormous gamble. She had heard of how the Red Keep was built to withstand sieges and how Aegon the Conqueror's dragon, Balerion the Black Dread, had originally sealed the Targaryen claim on this ground. Much of the keep's stone was rumored to be fused by dragonfire from those early days. But she believed in Drogon. She believed in the bond they shared. A precise, concentrated assault might break those stones again. She just had to ensure it spared the innocents outside. She maneuvered through the ranks, beckoning Grey Worm and the others to follow. With her eyes fixed on the ring of Lannister soldiers, she spoke calmly. "When we engage, drive them back inside. Keep them contained within the fortress walls. I'll bring Drogon to break the Red Keep from the inside out." Grey Worm nodded once, his jaw set. The unsullied ranks advanced, forming a wedge. The Lannister men braced themselves for the charge. Daenerys slid off her horse, more comfortable on foot for the final stage of this plan. There was a strange hush once more, the final moment before swords clashed. Then Daenerys, at the front, shouted a command and the Unsullied surged forward. Spear tips gleamed as they crashed into the defenders. The Lannisters fought with the desperation of cornered animals, their swords rising and falling in flashes of steel. The clamor of battle soared in the courtyard, echoing off the high walls of the keep. Daenerys stood back from the fiercest fighting, guarded by a ring of loyal soldiers carefully commanding her battalions. She sought to trap the Lannisters within their own fortress gates. One by one, the Scorpions fired from above, massive bolts clattering against the stone, sometimes skewering an unsullied soldier who could not raise his shield in time. For every bolt that found its mark, another soared wide, clanging off the courtyard or burying itself in an empty patch of ground. Daenerys glanced skyward, relieved that Drogon soared far enough overhead to evade those lethal missiles. Bit by bit, the Unsullied wedge forced the defenders toward the keep's huge doors. She saw the older captain with the scar barking orders, mustering a grim effort to resist. The defenders formed a small shield wall. Their faces were pale, but they held their ground. Daenerys watched Grey Worm slip through the chaos like a dancer, knocking aside a spear thrust and driving his own spear into a gap in a Lannister's armor. Around her, men were crying out, swords were scraping on shields, and arrows whizzed from the ramparts. Still, the wedge pressed on, guided by her unrelenting command. Some of the Lannisters, clearly outmatched, glanced about as though searching for a way to yield. But their captain forced them to stand firm. Finally, Daenerys saw it. A narrow opening between the Lannister line and the main doors to the keep. She threw back her head, whistling, and Drogon answered with a roar from above, beating his wings in a wide arc. Daenerys sprinted toward the opening, Grey Worm at her side, and a handful of Unsullied peeling off to protect her. If she reached the great doors before the Lannisters realized what was happening, she could get Drogon inside. She only needed enough space. The plan was as bold as it was dangerous. But if it worked, it could save countless civilian lives by isolating the destruction to the keep itself. She felt her heart hammering as she ducked a wild slash from a frantic Lannister soldier. Grey Worm parried the man's blade, pivoting smoothly to take him down with a thrust. Daenerys pressed onward, each step a risk, ignoring the clang of steel and the whine of bolts overhead. From the corner of her eye, she caught glimpses of her men forcing the defenders back. At last, she saw the keep's entrance looming ahead, two massive wooden doors reinforced with iron. They were shut, but not yet barred from within, given the sudden press of the fight. This was her chance. She lifted a hand to Grey Worm, who nodded. Together, they raced the last few paces. Behind them, the Ring of Unsullied prevented any immediate Lannister interference. Daenerys threw her weight against the heavy door, Grey Worm helping, and it groaned open a few inches. A scorpion bolt splintered the wood just beside her, and she gasped, staggering back. But Grey Worm was there, unwavering, shoving again, and the door inched open enough to admit them. Daenerys darted inside, heart pounding. The corridor beyond was dimly lit by flickering torches, the air stale with the smell of old stone. A handful of Lannister guards reeled at the sight of intruders. One lunged forward with a pike, but Daenerys ducked, feeling the tip whistle past her ear, and Grey Worm dispatched the guard in a single, devastating strike. There was little time to waste. If they could secure this corridor, she could summon Drogon right here, allowing him to breach from within. The plan was to bring down the keep's foundational supports. A direct overhead assault was too dangerous. There were scorpions everywhere on these outer walls, but from inside, Drogon could channel his fire at key points. It was a strategy suggested by Tyrion, once her advisor, and refined by the engineers who had studied the keep's design. If executed properly, it would tear down the fortress from its heart, ensuring minimal collateral damage. She could hear the battle raging behind her. The rest of the Unsullied pressed in, capturing the corridor and fanning out to secure adjacent chambers. The Lannister defenders inside the keep tried to fight back, but the fierce momentum of Daenerys' forces overwhelmed them. She glimpsed flashes of steel on steel, the swirl of cloaks, the thunder of boots. It happened quickly, a swirl of violence that left the corridor clear of all but the dead or captured. Daenerys forced her breathing to steady. This was it. Looking toward the archway that opened into a large courtyard at the keep's center, she saw a place wide enough for Drogon to land. She sprinted toward it, ignoring the dull ache in her limbs and the pounding in her ears. She emerged into the yard, a deserted space ringed by high walls, walkways, and the overhead shapes of scorpions that had been aimed outward, not inward. The architecture was imposing, but it might serve her well if Drogon could slip in through the partial roof opening above. Daenerys nodded to Grey Worm. "Hold the perimeter," she commanded. Grey Worm saluted, leading a contingent of Unsullied to block every entrance and corridor feeding into this courtyard. "No one enters. Let none escape." She allowed herself one calming breath. Then she lifted her gaze to the patch of sky visible above. Her lips parted in a single word, "Drogon." His roar answered, reverberating through the stone. She waited, heart hammering, as his dark shape swept overhead, momentarily blocking the sun. With a tilt of his vast wings, he maneuvered downward. Archers on the high walls could not pivot their scorpions inward quickly enough. In a flurry of shattered masonry and a rush of air, Drogon descended into the courtyard, landing in a swirl of dust and debris. He let out a deafening roar that shook the entire keep, and Daenerys felt a surge of fierce pride and relief. Her greatest ally was here at last, within the very heart of Lannister power. She hurried to his side, running a hand along his scaled flank. "Dracarys," she whispered, but not at random. She moved with urgency to the thick columns that supported the keep's upper floors, columns carved from stone and heavily reinforced. If they collapsed, the entire structure above would come crashing down, but only on the keep itself. The challenge lay in controlling the intensity of Drogon's fire. Too great a conflagration and the devastation could spiral outward, swallowing the city. If they were too conservative, they wouldn't bring the keep down. The margin for error was razor-thin. Drogon, as if sensing his mother's focus, lowered his head, smoke drifting from his nostrils. Daenerys gestured to one of the largest columns. "Dracarys," she commanded firmly. The great dragon bellowed, and a stream of fire roiled from his jaws, enveloping the stone in a searing inferno. The heat was staggering, forcing Daenerys to shield her face with her arm. The stone turned black, then cracked, shards flaking away under the relentless barrage of dragon flame. With a thunderous groan, a portion of the column gave way, sending a cascade of rubble onto the courtyard floor. Daenerys winced, stepping back, but she saw the result, the partial collapse of the overhead walkway. The structure shuddered and she realized they were on the right track. She guided Drogon to the next support pillar, ignoring the confusion of Lannister soldiers who rushed in from side corridors only to be met by the Unsullied's unforgiving spears. Another torrent of flame, another crumbling roar of stone. She felt the keep under her feet trembling, the floor threatening to buckle. Shouts echoed from above, presumably those defending the ramparts, now realizing that their fortress was collapsing around them. Her heart hammered. She had to ensure she and her men got out before the entire keep fell in on itself. The third and fourth columns followed. With each blast of flame, more of the keep's core foundations weakened. The entire building groaned like a dying beast. Sections of the ceiling began to collapse in the courtyard. Dust filled the air, stinging Daenerys' eyes, but she pressed on, encouraging Drogon to keep to the plan. They had memorized the layout with her advisors. If the central columns were destroyed in the right sequence, the Red Keep would collapse inward, burying itself in a carefully localized ruin. At least, that was the theory. The risk of partial collapses or massive debris fields that might spread into the city was real, but Daenerys had chosen to believe in this plan to prevent a full-scale burning of King's Landing. More Lannister defenders tried to swarm into the courtyard. She saw them appear through the churning clouds of dust, a half-dozen with swords, another with a crossbow. But the Unsullied swiftly formed a shield wall. Grey Worm led the defense, and though some of her men fell to crossbow bolts, the small group of defenders stood no chance against the unwavering discipline. Ser Davos and a few freeriders had also made their way in, though Davos was no fighter on the level of the Unsullied. He stood ready to do his part. Daenerys was thankful she had loyal men and women around her. Another scorpion bolt soared from a walkway overhead, narrowly missing Drogon. Enraged, the dragon whipped his tail upward, smashing the walkway into a shower of stone. The scorpion crew tumbled to their deaths with screams lost in the thunder of collapsing masonry. As the building's foundation buckled further, an entire section of wall behind Drogon split with a deafening crack. Daenerys gasped, staggering as the ground lurched beneath her. She knew time was almost up. If she waited too long, the entire courtyard might bury them all. But there was one more column, the largest of the load-bearing supports, that had to be destroyed. She shouted the order to her men, "Withdraw. Get to the outer courtyard." Then she guided Drogon toward that final column, a monstrous stone support ringed by iron braces. She placed a hand on his flank, felt the tremor of his muscles, the raw power coiled just beneath the scales. He was as tense as she was, but unwavering. "Dracarys," she said, her voice straining to be heard over the din. Drogon's roar rose again, and a torrent of flame engulfed the column. The iron braces glowed red, then white, then deformed under the intense heat. Stone cracked like thunder, and finally the entire mass gave way, toppling with a rumble that felt like the anger of the gods. The courtyard erupted in a storm of debris. Daenerys coughed, choking on the swirling clouds of dust. Above her, a chain reaction began. The overhead floors, the towers, the entire main structure of the Red Keep trembled, then collapsed inward with a roar that blotted out all other sound. For a moment, she thought she would be crushed by the avalanche of rubble. Drogon spread his wings, battered by falling stone. Grey Worm and the Unsullied had managed to exit through a corridor, but Daenerys remained close to her dragon. If he panicked, the plan might still fail. The dust was so thick she could barely see more than a few feet. The cacophony of grinding stone and snapping timbers filled her ears. "Drogon," she called out, desperation edging her voice. She heard him growl, but the swirl of dust concealed his form for an instant. Then she felt his flank press against her gently, guiding her. Without hesitation, she grabbed onto a jagged scale, pulling herself closer. She could hear slabs of the ceiling smashing down all around them. "Fly," she commanded, praying there was space for him to take wing. With a powerful heave, Drogon beat his wings. Broken masonry pelted him, but he flapped again, lifting them off the trembling ground. Daenerys clung to him as they rose through the swirling haze, ascending toward the jagged gap in the roof. The swirling dust made her eyes water, her lungs burn, but she felt the rush of open air as they emerged from the courtyard, just high enough to clear the sagging walls. For one heart-stopping moment, she thought a scorpion bolt might find them, but the scorpions had been rendered useless by the collapse, half buried in debris. Then they were free, soaring upward into the morning sky. Below her, the Red Keep caved in on itself in a colossal shudder of stone, an avalanche of rubble filling the old foundations. Towers toppled inward, walls collapsed, and the fortress that had long symbolized Lannister power came crashing down in a single cataclysmic event. Great clouds of dust and debris billowed out from the epicenter, but as Daenerys circled above, she realized the devastation was largely contained within the Red Keep's perimeter. The outer city walls and the nearby buildings that had housed so many common folk appeared relatively untouched. She couldn't be entirely sure of the scale of damage from above, but it seemed the plan had worked. They had destroyed the seat of power without setting the entire city aflame. She soared lower, searching for signs of her men. The Unsullied had retreated to the city square. They gazed upon the falling fortress with a mixture of awe and wariness. Plumes of dust spiraled upward like ghostly columns, but the rest of King's Landing stood intact. Some buildings near the keep had taken damage from falling debris, but not on the scale of total annihilation. Daenerys silently thanked the gods for that. She spotted a safe stretch of ground near the square and guided Drogon to land. The moment she touched down, Grey Worm sprinted to her side, checking to see if she was injured. She waved him off, coughing out a haze of dust, but unhurt. She saw Ser Davos approaching as well, his expression torn between relief and astonishment. "It's done," Daenerys said, her voice thick with dust. She turned toward the ruined Red Keep. The fortress has fallen. Her gaze flicked over the city skyline. Cersei was gone, presumably buried beneath the rubble unless she had fled beforehand. Either way, her hold on the capital had been broken in a single stroke. No cheering rang out yet. The warriors, both Targaryen loyalists and Lannister survivors who had surrendered, all stared at the collapsed keep, taking in the enormity of what had just happened. Daenerys felt her stomach twist as she wondered how many defenders had been crushed in that collapse. But she reminded herself that they had tried to give them every chance to yield. She closed her eyes, remembering how her dream of conquest had once threatened to spill over into madness and cruelty. This time she had chosen a different path. The city still stood. The small folk lived. The symbol of tyranny, the fortress that had so often housed despots, was dust. By the time the echoes of that collapse settled, King's Landing was blanketed in a strange stillness. Sporadic pockets of fighting continued here and there, but the bulk of the Lannister army seemed to realize that their queen was gone and their fortress destroyed. Daenerys turned to Grey Worm. "Have our men secure the city street by street. Spread the word that hostilities have ended, provided the Lannisters throw down their arms. If any pockets of resistance remain, offer them the chance to surrender before you take them. No harm to civilians, no looting. Anyone caught harming innocents will answer to me." Grey Worm bowed his head. "It will be done, Your Grace." She saw the respect in his gaze. For months, they had marched and fought, uncertain how it would end. Now it seemed the end might be more merciful than any had dared hope. The horror of war was not entirely undone, but Daenerys had spared King's Landing the fate of burning to ashes. Standing in that square, Daenerys felt the weight of the final step. She had broken the wheel of the Red Keep, but she had to prove to the people that a new era was dawning, a better one. She surveyed her exhausted but triumphant army. The Dothraki, fierce as they were, had been instructed to hold back once the gates were opened, focusing on subduing pockets of cavalry. Their presence in the city had to be carefully managed, or chaos would ensue. The Unsullied, disciplined beyond compare, had done most of the pushing into the city. She saw them now, forming ranks, guiding surrendered Lannister men to a holding area. She nodded with quiet approval. Ser Davos stepped closer, removing his glove to wipe sweat from his brow. "Your Grace, we should send riders to the rest of the realm with the news. The capital is yours. Cersei Lannister is either dead or fled. The Iron Throne is—" He hesitated, glancing at the collapsed keep. "Well, the Iron Throne is gone, I'd wager. Buried under tons of rubble." Daenerys felt a pang of irony at that. She had once envisioned herself seated on the Iron Throne, that grand symbol of authority. And yet now the seat of her ancestors was presumably destroyed in the cataclysm. Had she just dismantled the very icon of Targaryen rule she had strived her whole life to claim? The notion rattled her, but at the same time, she felt a sense of liberation. Perhaps the realm didn't need that twisted throne of melted swords. Perhaps the realm needed a new seat, a new symbol, a fresh start that wasn't tainted by centuries of bloodshed. She breathed in and out, steeling herself. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but resolute. Send word to every corner of Westeros. The war is over. The Red Keep is destroyed, and I claim the city in the name of House Targaryen. Let all those who would resist know that we have spared the city's people. Let them come to see that I do not wish to rule through fear, but through justice." Davos bowed, looking strangely moved. Then he turned to set about his tasks. Daenerys stood among her soldiers, the broken fortress behind her, and imagined the future. She heard the sounds of small folk emerging tentatively from alleyways, curious to see what had happened. Some approached, eyes wide, uncertain if it was safe. She remembered the day she had freed the slaves of Meereen, how they had reached out to her with gratitude and hope. She felt that same stirring in her chest now. A young boy, perhaps no older than 10, in tattered clothes, edged forward from behind an overturned cart. The dust still hung in the air, and his face was streaked with grime. He peered up at the tall, unsullied spears, trembling, unsure if he was about to be struck down. Daenerys met his gaze and slowly knelt, setting aside the sword she carried for mere defense. She beckoned him, offering her hand. The boy hesitated, then took a few tentative steps closer. He glanced from her silver hair to Drogon, who rumbled behind her like a living mountain. "It's all right," Daenerys said gently. "No one will hurt you." Her voice carried through the hush. Soldiers and small folk alike watched this exchange. The boy, trembling, took another step, eyes flicking to the ruin of the Red Keep. Then he looked back at Daenerys, confusion plain on his face. "The queen burned my home," he murmured, voice quavering. She realized he was talking about Cersei or perhaps the chaos of the previous weeks. She wasn't sure. All she knew was that these people had known only terror for too long. She offered a kind smile, though sorrow touched her eyes. "I'm sorry you've suffered," she said softly. "I can't undo what's been done. But I promise you, no more fire, no more death. We're going to build something better." She reached out her hand again, palm up. Slowly, haltingly, the boy set his small hand in hers. The hush of the square deepened, and Daenerys felt tears prick her eyes. She rose, gently guiding him by the hand for a moment. "Go," she urged, motioning him toward a cluster of frightened townsfolk. "Find your family, stay close to them. We will make sure you have food and shelter." The boy scampered off, weaving through the ranks of Unsullied who parted to let him pass. An older woman, perhaps his mother, rushed forward to gather him in her arms, tears streaming down her face. Daenerys saw the look of wary hope in that woman's eyes. It was a look she had seen in Essos in the aftermath of liberation. People who had been frightened to hope, now daring to believe in change. Daenerys steeled herself. The city was hers, but so was the responsibility for all those lives that had been spared. She had to prove she was worthy of that trust. She turned to Grey Worm. "Send out medics to help the wounded, both ours and theirs. Make sure water is distributed, and find a place to shelter the displaced. The Great September is gone, but perhaps we can set up tents in the squares. I want no one dying of thirst or injury in my city." Grey Worm nodded, signaling captains to carry out her orders. Already, the discipline of the Unsullied was being put to a new purpose, healing rather than killing. Some of the Dothraki, less accustomed to this role, looked uncertain, but the presence of Grey Worm and other seasoned warriors kept them in line. They respected Daenerys deeply, and they knew she would not tolerate cruelty. Hours passed in a blur of frantic organization. Daenerys and her advisors spread out across King's Landing, ensuring that no pockets of violence continued unchecked. Some local men and women, seeing that the fight was over, volunteered to help. Others simply huddled in corners, too frightened or exhausted to move. Here and there, Daenerys came upon scenes of tragedy. Civilians injured by stray arrows, houses partially collapsed by the fighting, families mourning fallen loved ones. Each one weighed on her soul. But she also encountered scenes of relief. Prisoners who had been treated well, children reunited with parents, Lannister soldiers who had cast aside their swords and were given water instead of a death sentence. By the time the sun sank below the horizon, Daenerys stood at the top of a half-collapsed rampart overlooking the city. Behind her, the Red Keep was a blackened heap of rubble, still smoking faintly in the twilight. Torches and fires dotted the streets below, but far fewer flames than there might have been if she had used Drogon indiscriminately. She surveyed the battered yet still standing city. A wave of fatigue crashed over her, the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. She sensed movement behind her and turned to see Grey Worm, exhausted but unbowed. "We have pacified the last of the resistance," he reported. "Many of the Lannister men have surrendered. Some tried to flee, but they were caught outside the gates. We placed them in custody. We'll need to decide what to do with them." Daenerys nodded. "They'll stand trial or be allowed to pledge loyalty, depending on their crimes." Then her gaze flickered to the distant city streets. "And the civilians?" she asked, bracing for a grim report. Grey Worm allowed the faintest hint of relief to show on his usually stoic face. "Casualties were far fewer than any of us expected, considering the siege. Most of the people are frightened, but they saw your men showing mercy. They've begun to calm." Daenerys exhaled, her relief palpable. The ghosts of all the tragedies she had witnessed in her life seemed to ease their grip on her heart for a moment. She had proven it could be done, victory without mass slaughter. A Targaryen conquest that did not rely on terror. That knowledge strengthened her resolve. She would spend the coming days proving her compassion by rebuilding, by feeding the poor, by punishing those who committed atrocities. She would make the city better than it had been under Cersei or any other occupant of the Iron Throne. As darkness fully settled, Daenerys descended from the rampart and made her way through the city with a small escort, ensuring that any pockets of disarray were addressed. She heard murmurs of her new title among the people, though some said it with apprehension: the Dragon Queen, the Breaker of Chains. She accepted the caution in their voices, knowing trust must be earned. At one point, she passed a group of orphans gathered in the street. One recognized her and approached shyly, offering a broken toy as if it were tribute. She knelt, brushing the child's hair aside, and promised them food and shelter. The moment felt small but significant. This was how she would begin to heal the wounds of war, one promise, one act of kindness at a time. She spent that first night in the ruins of Maegor's Holdfast, or what remained of it. A portion of the fortress's outbuildings had survived the collapse, but only barely. Her advisors begged her to find safer lodging in the city, but she refused. It felt important to remain in the seat of power she had taken, even if that seat was now a collection of broken stones. Maybe she wanted to remind herself of the price of war. Or maybe she felt she owed it to the ghosts of House Targaryen who had ruled here once. She found a half-intact chamber and sat on a cold stone bench, letting her fatigue wash over her. Drogon roosted nearby, curling protectively around a courtyard partially open to the sky. She could hear his low rumble as he settled, watchful and alert. Sleep came in fitful snatches. Daenerys dreamed of dragons alighting on tall spires of a new palace, a place of light and open courtyards, not the claustrophobic halls of the Red Keep. She saw the faces of her lost family, Rhaegar, Viserys, even the father she never knew, the Mad King, all swirling in a spectral haze. They gazed upon her, uncertain whether to condemn or praise. She thought she heard Rhaegar whisper something about the Song of Ice and Fire. Then the dream changed, and she was standing among the freed slaves of Essos once more, the blazing sun overhead, the cheers of the crowd echoing. She felt a hand on her shoulder, turned, and saw Missandei smiling at her, alive and well. Daenerys woke with tears on her cheeks, the memory of her friend's death stabbing her anew. But she let that sorrow fuel her determination to rule justly. She would build the world Missandei had believed in. At dawn, she emerged to find the city still quiet, though not silent. The crows had already begun to gather over the bodies of those who had fallen. She ordered them respectfully buried or burned, both Lannisters and Targaryen soldiers alike. The city's clerics, those who remained, came out to offer final rites. People from all walks of life joined in the grim labor, united by the need to clean up after the storm. Daenerys moved among them, offering words of consolation. Some spat curses, blaming her for the destruction. Others thanked her for being merciful. She accepted both. In a war-torn realm, every action was bound to be judged from many angles. As the day wore on, a line of wounded people formed near a makeshift healing station that the Unsullied had set up. Former Lannister soldiers mingled with commoners, and Daenerys saw some friction, but her guards kept order. She had to address the city's future quickly. So, that afternoon, she gathered representatives of the local merchant guilds, the surviving city watch, and some minor lords who had chosen not to flee or die. They convened in what remained of a stable courtyard near the keep. There, Daenerys spoke plainly, explaining that her goal was to establish a council for the city's governance until it could be stabilized. She promised to enforce fairness and justice, not tyranny. She encouraged them to work with her. Most listened warily but did not protest. Too many had seen enough bloodshed. They were willing to give her a chance, if only because they knew the alternative was chaos. A few challenged her with sharp questions, but she answered them calmly, refusing to let her pride or anger show. She had learned from bitter experience that a ruler must be more than a conqueror. She must be a caretaker, a unifier. Word spread across the 7 kingdoms. Delegations arrived within days, traveling hastily once they learned that King's Landing had fallen but remained largely intact. Many came expecting to see a city in ruins or a queen stained with the blood of innocence. Instead, they found a place wounded but still breathing. They found a queen who walked among the people, distributing bread and ensuring water was accessible to those in need. Rumors flourished, tales of how the Dragon Queen destroyed the Red Keep from within, bringing it down like a controlled avalanche without unleashing a full dragonfire rampage. Some called it a new form of Targaryen warfare, ruthless yet precise, terrifying yet merciful. Others whispered it was a sign the gods favored her, that she could control destruction like no other. Daenerys herself attributed it to the advice of her skilled advisors, to the unmatched discipline of the Unsullied, and to a bit of luck that the keep had collapsed inward as intended. Among the delegations, the highest-ranking lords from the Reach and the Stormlands arrived first, tentatively offering to treat with the Dragon Queen. Their armies had been battered by the wars, and they had little desire to oppose a ruler who had proven she could take King's Landing in a single day. They spoke of forging alliances, perhaps seeking betrothals or trade. Daenerys met with them on the city walls, ironically the same walls she had once threatened to burn, and explained her vision for a unified Westeros. One free of tyrants, where people could live without fear. The North, too, sent representatives, though their bond with Daenerys was complicated by the memory of the wars and alliances. Still, the news that she had spared King's Landing softened some hearts. Sansa Stark dispatched a diplomatic envoy to determine the stability of Daenerys' rule. The delegates found a queen who welcomed them openly, not as supplicants but as peers. She offered them seats around her war table, which had been hastily set up in a crumbled courtyard. She showed them the city, letting them witness that, while the scars of battle remained, the people were not cowering in fear. They saw orphans being fed, wounded soldiers of both sides receiving medical attention, and Lannister men who had been captured now working alongside Targaryen soldiers to rebuild walls and clear rubble. The swirl of hammering, sawing, and hauling of debris filled the air with a strange sense of hopeful industry, like a city half in ruin and half in rebirth. One of Sansa's envoys, a weathered man named Lord Harold, asked her bluntly, "Your Grace, what do you intend now? The old seat of power is destroyed. There is no Iron Throne. Will you build a new one, or will you return to Dragonstone and simply rule from afar?" Daenerys considered the question carefully. She glanced at the place where the Red Keep had once towered. All that remained was a scorched shell and heaps of rubble, currently being picked apart by laborers, searching for anything salvageable. Her mind flicked back to the dream she'd had of an open, sunlit palace. "I will build a new seat for the realm," she said softly, "one that does not symbolize fear and the weight of centuries of oppression. Perhaps it will be here in King's Landing, or perhaps we'll find another location. But for now, my place is among the people who need guidance. My duty is to restore order, feed the hungry, and ensure peace. If I must sit on a simple wooden chair in a ruin while I do so, then so be it. A throne is not what makes a queen." Her words echoed in the courtyard, and Lord Harold nodded slowly, eyes reflecting a mixture of respect and cautious acceptance. Others around the table murmured assent or thoughtful silence. Daenerys felt a flicker of pride. She had come a long way from the frightened girl who had been traded like a piece of meat to Khal Drogo. She had been tested, forged in the fires of heartbreak and war. Now she believed in her cause more than ever. Time passed. Days turned to weeks, and the city's most urgent crises were addressed. Daenerys turned over the stocks of grain that had been hoarded by Cersei's officials, distributing them among the starving populace. Wells were reopened, aqueducts repaired. The Lannister banners were torn down from the city's parapets, replaced by the three-headed dragon of Targaryen red and black. Yet Daenerys did not allow public retribution or acts of vengeance. Some demanded punishment for those who had served Cersei, especially the hated Queen's Guard who had once terrorized the people. Daenerys set up a rudimentary court to hear grievances, judging each case on its merit. Some of the worst offenders were sentenced to labor or imprisonment, a few to execution, but it was all done through a process rather than a wave of dragon fire. The message was clear: this queen upheld law, not capricious violence. The populace, wary at first, began to believe her intentions might be genuine. She understood she was still walking a tightrope. Her rule was not yet secure. Rivals from across the sea, or even certain lords within Westeros, might see the fall of Cersei as an opportunity to strike, while Daenerys' hold was tenuous. But she pressed on, forging alliances and sending ravens promising peace to any who would join her. She offered pardons to houses that had supported Cersei, provided they swear fealty now. With each passing day, more lords bent the knee, either out of genuine conviction or out of pragmatic caution. Meanwhile, the bulk of her Dothraki horde began to grow restless. They had followed her beyond the narrow sea in search of great battles and spoils. Now, in a city she wished to protect, Daenerys had to find a way to keep them occupied without letting them run wild. She promised them land, the chance to settle if they chose, or the glory of traveling north to fight the occasional bandit or rebellious holdfast that refused to acknowledge her rule. Surprisingly, some among the Dothraki relished the idea of farmland or small hamlets where they could graze their horses. Others expressed interest in traveling east again, but Daenerys persuaded them to remain for the time being, ensuring she had enough force to deter any rivals. She also gathered the Unsullied to her, offering them a place in the city's new watch, an elite corps that would uphold her laws and protect the people. Many agreed, loyal to their queen, seeking new purpose now that the wars were nearing an end. Grey Worm, though still grieving the loss of Missandei, threw himself into the task of organizing these new defenders. The presence of the Unsullied in the streets reassured many that criminals would be kept at bay. With each sunrise, Daenerys found herself growing more hopeful. She walked through neighborhoods that once shuddered under the threat of the Mad King, then Tywin Lannister, then Cersei. Now children played in the rubble-strewn streets, no longer terrified of a random purge from the Red Keep. Beggars received bread from Targaryen-funded granaries. Shopkeepers reopened their stalls, while the queen herself traveled among them, learning of their hardships firsthand. She heard them call her Mysa, echoing the name given in Essos but with some measure of trembling curiosity. She acknowledged their greeting with gentle nods, encouraging them to speak freely about their needs. Still, not everyone was content. Some had lost friends or family in the siege, even if it was less destructive than it could have been. Rumors persisted that Daenerys was just another tyrant, a dragon queen waiting for the right moment to unleash her fury. Daenerys accepted that fear might linger for a generation. Only through consistent compassion, fair rule, and transparent justice could she hope to dispel those shadows. One day, she called upon the city's masons and engineers. They stood with her in the large square that faced the ruin of the Red Keep. Here, she laid out a grand vision, a new palace that would serve as a seat of governance open to the sunlight, featuring broad arches and colonnades, a place of airy courtyards and gardens. She wanted it to be a symbol of rebirth, not a fortress of fear. She insisted that it be built in a way that welcomed the public, with a grand courtyard open for assemblies and celebrations. She also ordered a memorial to those who had perished in the wars. The masons exchanged looks of awe. This was a massive undertaking, and it would require time, resources, and labor. Daenerys promised it would be done in stages, employing many of the city's jobless. The wealth seized from Cersei's treasuries would help fund it. That evening, she climbed a hill on the outskirts of the city, a vantage point from which she could see the entire sprawl of King's Landing, the winding Blackwater Bay, and the dappled farmland beyond. She rode upon Drogon, who glided silently through the dusk. Alighting on a flat rock, she dismounted and gazed upon the city lights flickering below. In the center, she could see the fires of the camps where laborers and soldiers worked late, clearing rubble or forging new timbers. The city that had once been her enemy was now hers to nurture. A hush fell over her as she realized that, for the first time, she did not feel the pang of near-homicidal rage or the gnawing urge to prove herself through fear. She felt a quiet sense of purpose, a determination to uphold the vow she had made to protect these people, to break the cycle of brutality that had plagued the Iron Throne for so long. Drogon shifted beside her, his bulk a comforting presence in the cool night air. She remembered how, in another life, she might have let her anger, her heartbreak, and her thirst for vengeance drive her to burn the city to the ground. Instead, she had chosen a narrower path, one that forced her to cling to mercy in the face of betrayal and heartbreak. Perhaps she would never be loved by all. Perhaps she would forever carry the burden of suspicion as a dragon queen. But she could live with that as long as she held true to her convictions. Beyond the horizon, the rest of Westeros stirred, receiving the news of the city's fall. Some might seek to challenge her, claiming her unfit to rule because she was a foreign invader or because the Targaryen line had ended with the Mad King. She was prepared to meet them with open arms or with a spear if need be. But she knew that every day she held King's Landing peacefully was a day that lent credence to her claim. She did not rely on fear alone to maintain control, she relied on the hearts and minds of the people she governed. As the days turned into weeks, she received word that some of the main lords of Westeros wished to gather for a grand council to decide if they would recognize her officially. She welcomed this news, sending out invitations to every lord and lady of note, encouraging them to witness King's Landing with their own eyes and see that it still stood, that its people were not cowering under a dragon's shadow but rebuilding a shattered metropolis. This, she believed, was her best chance to secure a peaceful future by gaining the recognition of Westeros's great houses through demonstration of her fair governance. When the day of the council arrived, a vast tent was raised in the broad square that had once served as a parade ground for royal decrees. The rubble of the Red Keep loomed behind it, a stark reminder of the city's recent upheaval. Daenerys had the square cleared, set up a circle of chairs, each representing a lord or lady who had come. She sat at the head of the circle, not on a throne but on a simple wooden seat. Drogon perched on a broken tower some distance away, watchful but non-threatening. The lords of the Reach, the Vale, the Stormlands, and the Crownlands were all present. Representatives from Dorne came as well, curious about this queen who preached mercy. The Riverlands, still reeling from prior wars, sent an envoy. The Iron Islands, too, though they had fewer ships than before. The North's delegation was led by Sansa Stark herself, standing composed and regal. Daenerys felt a pang of memory for Jon Snow, who had vanished from her life in heartbreak and uncertainty. She did not know where he was now, though rumors placed him on the wall once more. That sorrow lingered in her heart, but she pressed on. Sansa scanned the circle, taking in the sight of Daenerys's modest seat, the battered city around them, and the hush of expectancy among the gathered lords. When she spoke, her voice was firm. This council is meant to decide the fate of the realm. We've seen what dragons can do, but we've also seen a queen who chose not to unleash her dragon's full fury. We've heard the rumors of a vow to protect the small folk, a vow not broken these past weeks. I stand here as a representative of the North, ready to hear Queen Daenerys Targaryen's claim. Daenerys inclined her head. She stood from her seat, feeling the eyes of every noble upon her. She could sense their conflicting emotions: fear, curiosity, skepticism, hope. She looked at each face in turn. Then she spoke, voice carrying across the square. I claimed this city after it had been terrorized by the Lannisters. I offered them a chance to surrender to avoid further bloodshed, and when they refused, I made my move. I destroyed the Red Keep, the symbol of tyranny from within. I did so to spare the innocent. And ever since, I have labored to feed the people, shelter them, and create a fair system of justice. I do not pretend to be perfect. I've led armies across the sea, I've fought wars, and I've made mistakes that weigh on me heavily. But I stand before you not as a conqueror dripping with innocent blood, but as a queen determined to bring peace to Westeros. I offer each of you the chance to work with me in building a realm where the law is just, where the weak are protected, and where the strong do not thrive on cruelty. If you choose to reject me, I will not burn your cities. I will not slaughter your people. But I will defend those who have chosen to place their trust in me. That is my vow. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Some exchanged uncertain glances. Others nodded. The hush pressed down. Finally, it was Sansa who broke it again. Words are wind, they say, but actions speak louder. We've seen the city still stands. We've heard from those who live here that they were not butchered. Many have lost loved ones in the wars, but they attribute that to the stubbornness of Cersei Lannister as much as anything else. She folded her hands before her. I am prepared to recognize Daenerys Targaryen as Queen of the Undulls, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, protector of the Seven Kingdoms, if the rest of you will do the same. And I will hold her to her vow of fairness. Should she break it, the North will remember. Those last words carried a quiet warning, but they also carried weighty acceptance. Daenerys bowed her head slightly in gratitude. One by one, the other lords voiced their positions. Some pledged their support without reservation, eager to align with the new power. Others did so with conditions, requesting certain rights for their regions, autonomy for their local lords, or restitution for damages sustained in the war. Daenerys did not dismiss these concerns. She agreed to consider them, to craft a royal decree that balanced the needs of each region. She was done with the old model of absolute monarchy that ignored the voices of the realm. At last, the Iron Islands' envoy stepped forward, stating that the Ironborn would follow her if they were allowed some measure of independence over their islands. Daenerys agreed in principle, stating that she wanted them as part of the realm, but recognized their cultural differences. An uneasy alliance was formed. Dorne likewise pledged fealty under the condition of minimal interference in their internal governance. Again, Daenerys consented as long as they upheld her fundamental laws: no slavery, no wanton persecution. In that great tent under the battered walls, with the swirl of dust motes catching the sunlight, an agreement took shape. The realm would be led by Daenerys, but the lords would have greater autonomy than under previous kings. A council, much like a small council but broader in scope, would convene regularly to advise her and represent every major region. Daenerys promised to work with them rather than over them. Piece by piece, the framework of a new order was born. When all was said and done, Sansa bent her knee, though not without lingering caution in her eyes. The others followed suit, each placing themselves under Daenerys' authority. At that moment, Daenerys felt a flutter in her heart. She had done it. She had secured the capital without raising it, claimed the throne without turning into a monster. She owed this to those who had believed in her: Ser Jorah, Missandei, Barristan Selmy, Tyrion, and many more. She owed it to herself. She would not squander this chance. Night fell on the city again, but now, for the first time in what felt like an age, King's Landing hummed with cautious optimism. The city's taverns filled with travelers and lords alike who told tales of what they had witnessed: the Great Keep's collapse, the Queen's mercy, the forging of a new royal council. Daenerys walked the streets once more, stopping to speak with passers-by who recognized her. Some dared to bow, some stared, but all seemed to realize there was something different about this queen from the line of dragons. When she finally returned to her makeshift quarters, a partially restored tower outside the collapsed keep, she found Grey Worm waiting. He bowed and informed her that the city was calm, the people receptive. Daenerys dismissed him with thanks, urging him to rest. She climbed a set of crumbling stairs, stepping out onto a balcony that overlooked the courtyard below. The moon bathed the ruins in pale light. Drogon slept in the courtyard, curled like a giant cat, his breathing rhythmic. Daenerys gazed upon him for a long moment, remembering the day she had emerged from Drogo's funeral pyre with 3 small dragons on her shoulders. They had been her hope, her future. Now only Drogon remained, the last living child of hers, the living embodiment of Targaryen fire. He had grown monstrous in size, capable of leveling cities, but he had also helped her protect the people this day. She leaned on the balcony's edge, letting her mind drift to the future. She still had so much to do: reorganize the city watch, formalize the new monarchy, ensure adequate harvests, rebuild alliances with every corner of Westeros. Challenges loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. But for now at least, the city breathed free. She had prevented the massacre of thousands of innocent souls. She had destroyed the seed of cruelty without destroying hope. The ring of swords in her head, the impetus to lash out in fury, felt quieter now, replaced by a gentle, persistent voice urging her to bring real peace to these lands. Morning came, and she woke to the sound of distant hammers, the city already stirring. She had never felt more alive. Outside, soldiers and laborers toiled side by side, clearing the last debris from the battle. The small folk went about their daily tasks with a mix of lingering apprehension and budding faith. Daenerys donned a simple cloak and ventured out alone, strolling through the streets where she was soon recognized. People whispered her name, some bowing, some simply watching. A few approached, asking her to settle disputes or to bless newborns. She tried her best, though she was no Septa. She listened attentively to petitions, passing them on to the new city officials she had appointed. As she continued, she found herself drawing near the ruins of the Red Keep again. She paused before a section of stone that had once formed the keep's outer wall. A broken archway led into what had been a hall or corridor. Debris blocked the way, but through a gap she spied a piece of twisted metal. Curiosity gnawed at her. Carefully, she climbed over the rubble, ignoring the dust that smeared her cloak. She followed the shape until she realized what she was seeing: a shard of a melted sword, part of the Iron Throne that had once stood proud in the throne room. She picked it up, its edges jagged and blackened. It was just a fragment, half an inch wide, the swirl of old steel barely distinguishable from the fused mass. She stared at it, reflecting on how many had died for that throne, how many had lusted after it, how many times it had cut those who sat upon it. Now here it was, reduced to nothing more than scrap. She could not help a faint smile. The wheel was broken indeed. The symbol of absolute monarchy was gone, scattered among the rubble. She tucked the shard into her pouch, a small reminder of the world she had left behind. Stepping back into the open air, she gazed around at the city rising all around her, battered but stubbornly alive, like a flower growing out of cracked stone. She caught sight of a group of children chasing each other around a collapsed pillar, giggling. The sound warmed her. She bowed her head, whispering a vow to herself, let them never know the horror that came before. She would rule so that they might grow up unafraid of a tyrant's shadow. In the days and weeks that followed, Daenerys continued to consolidate her rule, forging a new golden company out of disbanded forces, sending envoys to distant lords, and presiding over the city's restoration. There were still plenty of obstacles: bandits in the countryside, unruly lords who might test her boundaries, foreign interests that might see an opportunity in the shifting power structure. But with each passing dawn, the city took another step forward. The news spread across Westeros that King's Landing had been taken without the slaughter of thousands, that Daenerys Targaryen walked among her people. Some refused to believe it. Others decided to wait and see how long her mercy would last. But many found a kernel of hope in the possibility that, at last, the realm might have a monarch who understood both power and compassion. She had done what was once unthinkable: destroyed the Red Keep without razing the city, ended the war without dooming a generation to hatred and despair. She had proven that a Targaryen queen could be both dragon and liberator. The ghosts of her father's madness, her brother's cruelty, and her own darkest impulses no longer weighed so heavily on her shoulders. She was free to forge her own legacy, guided by the memory of the countless souls she had saved rather than those who had died in the fires of vengeance. And so it was that Daenerys Targaryen came to stand at the helm of a new age. The dust of the fallen keeps settling behind her, the hearts of the people beginning to open before her. For the first time since her exile across the narrow sea, she felt she was truly coming home, not just to a pile of rocks and a stolen throne, but to a realm she had shaped with her own hands, tempered by mercy, bound by justice, and graced by the possibility that a queen of dragons could also be a queen of peace. Daenerys Targaryen rose before dawn the next day, awakened not by a horn or a summons, but by her own restlessness. Though the Red Keep was rubble, its shadow lingered in her mind, and the full weight of ruling seemed to fall upon her shoulders the instant she opened her eyes. She had chosen to sleep in what remained of a half-collapsed tower outside the old keep's perimeter, a structure once used by lesser functionaries or traveling guests. Its walls bore cracks large enough for the morning breeze to slip through, but it was still standing, and that was more than could be said of most of the fortress. She dressed herself in a simple gown, pinned her silver hair back, and walked down the winding stair, passing unsullied guards who saluted her. Outside, the sky was a gradient of gray slowly brightening to pink. The city beyond the walls began to stir, the hush of night giving way to the shuffle of feet and the rattle of carts. Laborers, merchants, and soldiers moved in the streets, their eyes slightly brighter than in days past. For all the ruin that haunted King's Landing, it felt like a city determined to begin anew. Drogon was already awake, coiled in the courtyard. He shifted his head when Daenerys appeared in the archway, rumbled a greeting, and puffed a little gust of sulfur-scented smoke. She approached and put a gentle hand on the scaled ridge of his flank. It still amazed her that this formidable creature, largest dragon in the known world, could rest so quietly, curled like a house cat on the stone. She ran her fingers over the smooth black scales, remembering how small he had once been. He had grown not just in size but in temperament. Before, he was quick to fury, prone to wild hunts. But now he sensed her caution and matched it with a new steadiness. They had come a long way together. She had work to do. There were new city officials to meet, fresh concerns from the Merchants' Guild to address, and 100 smaller duties no queen could ignore. She intended to see to as many of them as she could before midday, then travel beyond the walls to meet with farmers petitioning for aid. Her days had been a flurry of action since the siege, and each morning she woke feeling more certain that a queen's greatest conquest was not winning a city by force, but winning her people's faith. She began the morning with a small council in a makeshift chamber. The battered facade of the building looked ready to crumble, but within, the walls were solid, and the high ceiling let in crisp morning air. The table they used had been carried in from a merchant's warehouse. Chairs were mismatched, some wooden with carved legs, others simple benches that had been hammered back together after the battle. The group gathered there was as eclectic as the furniture. Grey Worm, Ser Davos, a few newly named city administrators, and a handful of lords who had pledged fealty. They rose when Daenerys entered, and she motioned for them to sit. The meeting commenced with a report from one of her administrators, a wiry man named Linton Gelt, who oversaw supplies. He unrolled a parchment and cleared his throat. "Your Grace, we have taken stock of the granaries and storehouses. We have enough grain to feed the city for at least 3 months if carefully rationed. The flocks and herds around King's Landing, however, are significantly depleted. Many were confiscated by Cersei's men before the siege or lost during skirmishes. We'll need to import livestock or encourage faster breeding. Else we risk a meat shortage come winter." Daenerys nodded thoughtfully. "Redirect some of the crown's funds from Cersei's hoard, what remains of it, to purchase breeding stock from the Reach. They have farmland enough to spare animals. Issue fair prices so the local farmers do not feel cheated. Let us encourage them to send sheep, goats, whatever they can. In time, we can build back our own herds." Linton scribbled notes. Then Ser Davos chimed in, eyes shifting around the table. "Your Grace, I've also received word from the port. Several trading galleys have arrived, curious to see if King's Landing is open for commerce. They heard rumors of the city's destruction, but seeing it still stands, they're looking to trade spices from Essos, textiles from Pentos, and so on. We can tax them fairly, but if we charge too heavily, it might discourage them from returning." Daenerys set her hands upon the table, clasping them together. "We need that trade. The city must appear stable and welcoming, not exploitative. Keep the taxes moderate. I want news spreading across the narrow sea that King's Landing is open for business again. Let the same be set up and down the coasts of Westeros. Commerce will help rebuild faster than any single measure." Grey Worm offered a quiet nod of agreement, though he had little interest in the nuances of trade. He was more concerned with order and discipline in the city. When asked about the peacekeeping efforts, he reported that the Unsullied patrolled major streets in pairs, ensuring no leftover factions of Lannister loyalists stirred trouble. Most had surrendered or fled, but a handful still lurked, rumor said, robbing or assaulting travelers under cover of darkness. Daenerys ordered increased patrols at night, with strict guidelines to spare those who threw down their arms. She also saw to it that even criminals be given fair trials before city magistrates. Such a notion felt foreign to many who had known only summary justice. It was slow progress, but it was progress nonetheless. After the meeting, she conferred briefly with Ser Davos regarding the lords gathering in the city. Many had come to see the new Queen's Court in action, some out of genuine curiosity, others to gauge if she might be easily manipulated. Davos suggested arranging personal meetings with these lords, small audiences where she could hear their concerns, accept their oaths of fealty, and reassure them of her policies. Daenerys agreed. By mid-morning, she was in a long, open gallery that had survived the keep's collapse because it was part of an older building complex. The floor was dusty marble, the walls lined with alcoves that once held statues, most of which had been looted or shattered. The roof overhead was only partially intact, but the day was fair enough that sunlight streamed in, making motes of dust glow like drifting sparks. Here, a series of chairs and a single large seat served as her temporary audience chamber. Some called it the Queen's Gallery, a name that spread quickly among the city folk. She settled in her seat, resisting the urge to show her weariness, and beckoned the First Lord, a middle-aged man in battered finery, Lord Ryswell of the Crownlands. His lands had once been pledged to Cersei, but now he had come to bend the knee. Daenerys listened politely as he rattled off a series of concerns about brigands harassing his fields, a stream that had dried up, and peasants who were late on taxes. She promised to send an official from the city to investigate. He was not entirely happy, wanting immediate action, but he left with a stiff bow, mumbling that he was pleased to serve. Next came a lady from the Stormlands who asked for permission to oversee a small castle that had been left vacant by a family lost in the wars. Daenerys requested details and recommended that the matter be referred to the new royal council that would soon meet more formally. So it went hour by hour, local disputes and bits of feudal wrangling. The sun moved higher and Daenerys grew tired. Still she persisted, determined to show she was not aloof. A hush fell in the gallery when Sansa Stark arrived, accompanied by a pair of northern guards. They were dressed in thick cloaks despite the southern warmth, and her auburn hair gleamed under the sunlight. She appeared as poised as ever, her expression guarded but courteous. Daenerys stood, offering a slight smile. "Lady Sansa." Sansa inclined her head. "Your Grace." There was no warmth in her tone, but no hostility either. They had reached an unspoken truce. It was better than the open tension that once characterized their interactions. Daenerys gestured for her to sit in one of the chairs arranged nearby, but Sansa shook her head politely. I came to speak of certain matters regarding the North's position in this new arrangement. I was told the council is forming soon. I would like the North to have a prominent seat to ensure that my brother's pardon, my cousin's sacrifices, and those of the northern people are not forgotten. Daenerys had expected this. She nodded, wishing she could say something about Jon Snow, but she hesitated. His name set like a shard of ice between them, a sorrowful memory. Of course, we will determine the council's composition carefully. The North shall have a voice, as will Dorne, the Vale, the Stormlands, the Reach, the Iron Islands, and the Crownlands. Each region should feel represented. I do not want a throne built on neglected voices. Sansa's gaze flicked toward the broken sections of the walls. She paused, considering Daenerys' words. In that case, I'd request that Lady Brienne of Tarth serve in some capacity. She has House Tarth's interests, but she's also close to the Starks, and she's widely respected. She could speak not only for Tarth, but also for me when necessary. Daenerys remembered Brienne's unwavering loyalty and her honor. It seemed a wise suggestion. I welcome Lady Brienne's presence. Let her come to the next council meeting. We can formalize her role then. Sansa bowed slightly, the gesture more courtesy than deference. Thank you, Your Grace. The North appreciates it. She lingered, eyes traveling across the makeshift audience chamber, perhaps measuring the changes in Daenerys. The Targaryen queen looked thinner, the strain of so many tasks evident in the lines around her eyes, but she also radiated a certain calm. Sansa's lips curved in the barest hint of a smile that might have signaled a lessening of the old tension. Then she departed, her guards in step behind her. Daenerys resumed her seat, mindful that more supplicants waited. By midday, she finally stood to dismiss the rest of the line, promising to hear them on another day. She could not spend every hour greeting lords and ladies when the city's rebuilding demanded her presence in the streets. Yet these personal audiences mattered. Word would spread that the queen was accessible, that she listened. She stepped out into the daylight, where Grey Worm awaited with a handful of Unsullied. His expression was as stoic as ever, but she could see the faint concern in his eyes. Your Grace, you did not eat this morning. Shall we bring you food? She shook her head. Not here. Let's go to the courtyard near the old stables. The cooks have set up a small communal kitchen for the laborers. I'll take my meal with them. Grey Worm regarded her with faint surprise. As you wish. They walked, weaving through city lanes that had been cleared of most debris. Along the way, Daenerys saw half-collapsed walls propped with beams, roofless houses where families gathered scraps of timber to rebuild. The evidence of warfare was everywhere, but so too was the evidence of renewal. Merchants had begun to open stalls, hawking fresh fish, vegetables from nearby farms, pots and pans hammered out of salvaged metal. The sight of the queen and her escort drew attention. Some people bowed, others simply stared. A few called out to her, blessing her or voicing timid thanks that the city still stood. Daenerys offered nods and a few gentle words in return. When they reached the courtyard near the old stables, they found a scene of industry. Dozens of workers sawed wood, shaped stone, sorted nails and tools. In the center, a large cook fire burned with kettles simmering. The smell of stew and bread drifted on the air. Daenerys approached, hearing the murmur of conversation falter as people recognized her silver hair. She asked to cook for a small bowl, and in hushed awe he scrambled to oblige. She took the bowl of thick mutton stew, accepted a chunk of bread, and sat on a block of stone amid the workers. Grey Worm and the Unsullied stood nearby, uncertain, but she motioned for them to stand at ease. For a long moment, no one spoke. Men and women paused in mid-bite, as if unsure whether they should stand in the queen's presence. Daenerys looked around, meeting their eyes. Please, don't stop on my account. I'm here to eat and rest, just as you are. Her words had a gentle effect. Slowly, conversation resumed, and the clang of hammers picked up. She sipped the stew, found it hearty but a bit bland. She didn't complain. These people had no feast, they had necessity. That was enough. As she ate, she overheard scraps of their talk. References to damaged wells, rumors of bandits outside the gates, speculation over when the next ships of building supplies might arrive. She absorbed it all quietly, understanding that the heartbeat of a city was here, among the common folk, not in council chambers. A young stonemason ventured nearer, his hair dusty with plaster. He looked at Daenerys with wide, hopeful eyes. "Is it true you plan to build a new palace where the Red Keep once stood?" Daenerys swallowed a spoonful of stew and nodded. "I do, but not in the same spirit as the old fortress. I want a place that's open and bright, with gardens for everyone to enjoy. A seat that belongs to the people as much as it does to the crown." The mason's mouth hung open a moment as if such a notion were alien. Then he asked, "Will we be hired for it, my lady?" "There's plenty of us stonemasons hoping for work." Daenerys smiled. "Of course. That's why I speak with the masons and laborers. We'll need all the skill we can muster. The treasury will pay fair wages." The mason grinned, relief lighting his features, and hurried off to share the news with others. She finished her food, returned the bowl to the cook, and thanked him. Then she rose, feeling somewhat restored by the meal and the acceptance she'd witnessed. Grey Worm led her back toward the higher ground, where a scattering of small manors remained intact. She spotted a cluster of Dothraki to one side, their horses stamping restlessly. The Dothraki were accustomed to wide open plains, and these cramped streets tested their patience. Still, they had obeyed her edict. They had not pillaged, but restlessness burned in their eyes. One of the Khals, Ricardo, intercepted her near a shattered stone gate. He bowed his head respectfully. "Blood of my blood, the Dothraki grow tired of the city. The tents outside the walls are stifling. Many wish to ride. Will you let us roam west, perhaps to see these green lands beyond the horizon?" Daenerys understood their restlessness too well. They had followed her across the sea for glory, only to find themselves stuck in a city of stone. She paused, considering the risk of letting an armed Dothraki horde wander the countryside unsupervised. She could guess how the local lords would react to a horde galloping across their fields. Yet she did not want to keep the Dothraki as caged animals. "I will allow you to ride, but not in large raiding bands," she said. "I'll organize a proper expedition with my blessing, along with an official messenger from the crown. You'll announce yourselves as my allies, not enemies. You are to take supplies, trade fairly, and leave the local folk unharmed. If you find yourself short on provisions, you must purchase them, not take them by force. Am I clear?" Ricardo hesitated, but he saw the steely resolve in her eyes. He thumped a fist to his chest. "It will be done as you say, but it is strange to us." Daenerys placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know, but these are my people too. You have fought for me. Now live with me in peace. Those who wish to remain in the city can stay here. Those who wish to roam must abide by my rules." Ricardo nodded, though a flicker of doubt lingered in his features. The Dothraki were not used to such discipline outside of war. Still, he was loyal, as most were, and he would spread her word among the Khals. She watched him depart, leading a small group of riders out into the open road. She let out a quiet breath. Each day, there was a new challenge. She felt the swirl of responsibilities like a wheel spinning, and she realized that ironically, the wheel of power she had once vowed to break would keep turning if she did not adapt quickly to every shift. The next major challenge arrived a fortnight later when news from the Crownland's countryside reached her. Her scouts and traveling merchants reported that scattered groups of Lannister holdouts had holed up in old manor houses and keeps, refusing to recognize Daenerys' rule. Some pretended to be loyal but attacked travelers on the roads. Others claimed to be waiting for a true Lannister heir to rise. A few engaged in outright banditry. The worst of them was an aging knight called Ser Aemric Hightower, though not of the old town Hightowers, who had commandeered a small castle and begun mustering men to his cause. He declared that the Targaryen queen was a foreign usurper unfit to rule and that the city had only fallen because of trickery. Rumors said he had a scorpion or two left to him hidden in the castle yard. Daenerys summoned her war council, Grey Worm, a handful of other commanders, and Ser Davos. They pored over maps in the same half-collapsed room where they once planned the siege. Candlelight flickered on the battered table. Their breath was hushed with tension as they discussed how best to handle Ser Aemric and other holdouts. The simplest plan was to march an army to the castle, demand surrender, and if refused, crush them with overwhelming force. But that might well lead to bloodshed, and Daenerys was tired of war. She did not want to scorch the Crownlands and sow fresh terror. "If I lead a host against every holdout, we'll be at it for months," Daenerys pointed out, tapping the map. "In the meantime, the city's reconstruction will stall, and any show of excessive force might break the fragile trust we've begun to foster. We need to be more precise. We must separate the misguided from the malicious." Ser Davos nodded thoughtfully. "Aye, your grace. Many of these small bands might surrender if given a direct chance. Ser Amaric's castle is the real threat. He's cunning, or so rumor says. But perhaps if we offer a parley, we can learn whether his men truly believe in him or if they follow him out of fear." Grey Worm was less inclined toward parley. His instincts told him the rebels would betray them if given half a chance. But Daenerys remembered that the entire city had once been considered loyal to Cersei, and many had changed sides once they realized there was a better way. She decided to give the same chance to these rebels. They drafted a royal decree. Any holdouts who laid down arms and declared loyalty to House Targaryen within a fortnight would be pardoned, provided they had not committed heinous crimes. Those who continued to defy the crown would be declared outlaws, subject to arrest or execution. Messengers set out at once, each carrying sealed scrolls. Some traveled on swift horses, others by boat along the Blackwater River. Daenerys herself signed each scroll. The chance for peace was genuine. She wanted to avoid crushing men who might only be clinging to loyalty out of confusion. In the meantime, she ordered the Unsullied to remain prepared, in case a quick strike became necessary. Drogon, too, was restless, roosting outside the city's walls. She often visited him, stroking his scaly neck as he growled, longing for flight. She had to hold him back, for the sight of a dragon overhead might frighten the newly stabilized realm. Days passed and replies trickled in. Many small bands surrendered, relieved for the chance to lay down arms without retribution. A few had committed atrocities during the war, and Daenerys insisted they face the new courts. But most were simply soldiers of fortune who had lost their leader or peasants who had been forced into arms. Now they came forward, pledging to join the city watch or to return to farm life. Daenerys accepted them under supervision. Each time a letter arrived announcing a local stronghold's peaceful surrender, a little more tension drained from the capital. Yet Ser Aemeric Hightower remained defiant. No messenger returned from his castle, and rumors reached King's Landing that the old knight was preparing for a stand. When the fortnight ended with no word, Daenerys knew there was no choice but to respond. She summoned a small force, half a regiment of Unsullied, a few squads of the city guard, and a handful of Dothraki riders she trusted to remain disciplined. Grey Worm commanded the foot soldiers while she herself would oversee from the air. In the chill of a gray dawn, Daenerys mounted Drogon outside the walls, a swirl of dust rising around them. Soldiers gathered on horseback and on foot. The city gates opened with heavy groans and the column moved out onto the King's Road. Daenerys soared above them, Drogon's vast wings stirring the air, black scales glinting under the sullen sky. She kept him at a moderate distance so as not to incite panic among the farmers who might see them pass overhead. It took much of the morning to reach Ser Amaric's fortress, a modest stone keep perched on a hill, ringed by a dry moat and a wooden palisade. The flags overhead bore no sign of House Lannister or any recognized house. Only the knight's personal banner, a brown hawk on a black field, fluttered in the wind. As Daenerys' army approached, the gate remained firmly shut. Archers lined the ramparts, scorpions or large crossbows just visible behind their defenses. The old knight was well prepared. Daenerys circled overhead, scanning the fortress. From her vantage, she saw that while the keep was sturdy, it was hardly impregnable. If she unleashed Drogon, she could tear through the walls in minutes. But that would mean a savage battle, likely with casualties on both sides. Instead, she landed a short distance away. Grey Worm and his soldiers formed ranks behind her. The morning wind ruffled the black Targaryen banners they carried. She took a deep breath, gazing at the keep's high walls. She raised a hand, signaling a standard-bearer forward. The man held up a white banner of truce. Daenerys rode Drogon closer to the moat, but stopped well out of arrow range. Her voice carried across the field. "Ser Aemeric Hightower, I am Daenerys Targaryen, Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. I have come to offer you one last chance to surrender and avoid bloodshed. Open your gates, or we will be forced to take your castle by force." Moments passed in tense silence. Then the old knight's voice bellowed from atop the ramparts. He was clad in dull armor, a battered helm under one arm, his gray hair whipped by the wind. "Targaryen whore, you dare to call yourself queen when you burned your way into the city? I've heard the stories. I've seen the ashes. I know how your kind rules through fire and blood." Daenerys felt a flare of anger at his words, but she kept her composure. "You've heard lies, sir. The city is not ash. The people live? If you truly care for the realm, lay down your arms. My mercy is genuine. Defy me and you'll share the fate of all rebels." He spat over the parapet. "I do not recognize the daughter of the Mad King. I recognize only the rightful Queen Cersei, and I'll wait until she returns or another Lannister emerges to claim the throne." Daenerys' stomach twisted at the mention of Cersei. If the old knight was that lost to reason, she doubted Parley would succeed. Still, she tried once more. "Cersei is gone, buried by her own keep. You're clinging to a ghost. Don't throw away the lives of your men in blind loyalty to a dead cause." Ser Aemric gave a bitter laugh. "If I must die with my men, so be it. My soul is clean of bending the knee to a dragon witch." Daenerys' fingers curled into a fist. She signaled Grey Worm to pull back the standard-bearer. Enough had been said. She guided Drogon into the sky, surveying the fortress from above. The best approach, she decided, was not to burn it outright, but to break its outer wall at a single point. Then the Unsullied could pour in, forcing a quick surrender. Perhaps that would spare the defenders from a fiery end. She had no illusions that Ser Aemric would yield easily, but she hoped his men might see reason once the fortress was compromised. Drogon roared as Daenerys guided him into a dive. The scorpion bolts fired, whistling through the air. The first missed wide, kicking up clods of earth. The second whizzed just under Drogon's left wing. She felt him growl in warning. They soared aside, avoiding a direct hit. She spotted the scorpion's position near the top of the rampart, a wooden platform with a large crossbow. Daenerys decided to destroy it quickly before they could reload. She tightened her thighs around Drogon's flanks. "Dracarys," she commanded. A plume of fire erupted from his jaws, scorching the wooden platform. She guided the flames away from the keep's interior as best she could, focusing on that vantage point alone. The Scorpion crew scrambled for cover, but the structure was engulfed. Their weapon went up in flames. With the Scorpion disabled, she flew higher, scanning for any other siege engines. She spotted 2 smaller ballistae on different sections of wall. Grey Worm's archers returned fire from below, loosing arrows at the defenders who manned them. Meanwhile, the Unsullied advanced with siege ladders. Several of them carried a ram for the drawbridge. The moat was dry, so crossing was not an issue except for the height of the palisade. The defenders on the wall shot arrows down, but the Unsullied raised their shields and pressed on, a relentless tide. Daenerys circled above, searching for her opportunity. She angled Drogon toward the outer wall near the gate, unleashing another blast of flame to break the thick timbers of the palisade. Wood splintered, and the defenders scattered. She saw at least one ballista arrow sail upward, but it missed, snapping harmlessly overhead. The Unsullied rushed through the breach, scaling collapsed sections of the wall, clambering over flaming debris. A group of the defenders tried to hold them off, but Grey Worm led the charge with lethal precision. Daenerys glimpsed the clash from above. Spears thrust, swords swung, men cried out. Through the swirl of dust and smoke, she glimpsed the uncertain faces of some defenders as though they realized too late they had no chance. She watched as Grey Worm barked an order to show mercy if the enemy surrendered. Some flung down their weapons and raised empty hands. Others fought on, spurred by Ser Americ's furious shouts. Daenerys soared to the fortress courtyard where the final confrontation was unfolding. The keep's doors had been barricaded, but the Unsullied battered them. Inside, Americ's men made a last stand, a handful of archers in the windows. Daenerys decided it was time to end this. She guided Drogon down, landing in a flurry of dust. Before the archers could loose more arrows, she roared Dracarys at a pair of shuttered windows. Flames licked at the stone, forcing the archers away. Once they retreated, Grey Worm's men smashed through the doors in a burst of splintered wood. Within minutes, the keep was taken. A few loyalists died with swords in their hands, but many more threw down their arms once they saw no hope. Smoke drifted from scattered fires, but Daenerys had ensured no widespread blaze consumed the place. She refused to let the entire fortress burn if it could be captured and repurposed. The moat was worthless, the palisade in shambles, but the main structure still stood. At last, they found Ser Aemric in the central hall, perched on a dais with a sword in each hand. His once proud armor was scorched and his hair hung in sweaty tangles. Dozens of Unsullied ringed him with spears leveled. He stared at them with wild eyes, unwilling to yield. Daenerys dismounted outside and walked inside, Grey Worm flanking her. The hall was choked with dust, the tapestries torn. Bodies lay scattered, moaning in pain. Daenerys had expected she might have to kill Aemric, but she would offer him one final chance. "Sir Aemric," she said, raising her voice over the crackle of small flames. "It's over. Your men have laid down their arms. Surrender, and I will see that you face a fair trial. Persist, and you will die." "Here." He glared at her with unbridled hate. "A fair trial? From a dragon spawn? I'd sooner trust a viper to nurse my child." Daenerys felt a flicker of pity for this old knight, clinging to a notion of chivalry that had twisted into fanaticism. "This is your last chance." Sir Aemric bellowed a cry of rage and charged, swords raised. The Unsullied lowered their spears as Daenerys stepped aside. Before Aemric could reach her, Grey Worm's spear found a gap in his armor, sliding neatly between the plates. He staggered, eyes bulging. He dropped his swords, falling to his knees. Blood seeped across the stone. He tried to speak, but only a wet gurgle emerged. Then he toppled forward and was still. A hush fell over the hall. The defenders who had surrendered looked on with fear, wondering if they would share his fate. Daenerys motioned for the Unsullied to stand down. "This man chose death," she said, voice resonating in the dusty chamber. "Those who put aside their arms have my mercy." She turned a calm gaze on the disarmed rebels. "You fought for a cause that no longer exists. Lay claim to a better future or remain in chains of hatred. The choice is yours." They knelt, some trembling, others weeping. Daenerys surveyed them. She felt no triumph in this, only relief that the bloodshed had been contained. She ordered the fires extinguished, the wounded tended. The fortress was quickly secured, the rebellious banners torn down. She posted a small garrison of Unsullied to maintain order until local authorities could be appointed. Some of Sir Aemric's men pledged loyalty then and there, though she would ensure thorough questioning to see if they bore crimes. By late afternoon, Daenerys stood in the courtyard, studying the battered keep. Grey Worm joined her, silent and watchful. The fight had been brief, but the cost was still real, lives lost, more blood spilled in a realm already drowning in it. She took a weary breath. "We did as we had to," Grey Worm said softly, as though sensing her exhaustion. "He left no choice." Daenerys nodded. "Yes. I gave him every chance." Together, they walked back to Drogon. The black dragon huffed, shifting his massive weight as she approached. She glanced around at the Unsullied fortress. It would need repairs, but it could be used as a small holdfast for the Crownlands, a place to keep travelers safe from bandits. Perhaps that would be the best legacy for this place, not a monument to rebellion, but a bulwark of security. A few hours later, she and her forces marched back to King's Landing with another threat subdued. She felt both satisfied and weighed down. Each battle, each struggle, was a reminder that the realm was vast and fractious. There would be more holdouts or would-be usurpers, each one requiring a response. If she answered with fire, she risked becoming a tyrant. If she answered with too much patience, she risked letting chaos grow. Balancing mercy and strength was a delicate art that she would have to master every single day. In the following weeks, the realm settled further. More lords came to King's Landing in acceptance of Daenerys' rule. The countryside around the capital saw fewer bandits. The roads began to fill with merchants again. Daenerys spent her days overseeing building projects, meeting with the new council, and establishing courts to handle disputes. Sometimes she would fly Drogon over farmland, letting the peasants see him from above but never letting him unleash his fire. It was a reminder of the power she held in check, a silent vow that she would protect them, not destroy them. One morning, a surprise arrived in the form of a herald from the Vale. Lord Robin Arryn, the young ruler there, requested an audience, along with his guardians and a retinue of knights. Rumor held that the boy lord was eager to see a dragon in the flesh. Daenerys was not sure what to expect, but she honored the request. The Vale's support was crucial, and Sansa Stark had recommended forging closer ties. Within a fortnight, Lord Robin's party appeared at the city gates, banners flapping from a line of sleek horses accompanied by a small honor guard. Daenerys received them in the Queen's Gallery, the half-ruined hall that had become her standard reception area. Lord Robin, tall and lanky in his late teens, approached with a mixture of awe and nerves. He tried to adopt a regal bearing, though the effect was somewhat comical. His main guardian, Lord Royce, stood by, wearing a much more sober expression. They bowed as Daenerys gestured for them to rise. "My Lord Arryn," she greeted, scanning the young man's face. "Welcome to King's Landing. I trust your journey was safe." He nodded vigorously, eyes wide. "Yes, your grace. We traveled by the high road through the Riverlands, saw little trouble. I've heard tales of your dragon." Will I see him? Daenerys suppressed a slight smile. If you wish. Drogon roosts outside the city, near the hills. But we must discuss more important matters before we indulge your curiosity. How fares the Vale? Lord Royce cleared his throat, stepping forward. Your Grace, the Vale remains loyal to the memory of House Stark and House Arryn as it has for centuries. We understand you have begun a council for the realm's governance. We wish to take part. The Vale would send a permanent representative to your council, ensuring our voice in matters of trade, defense, and law. Daenerys welcomed the suggestion. Of course. A seat on the council for the Vale would be most welcome. I trust you have someone in mind. Robin glanced nervously at Royce, then back to the Queen. We were thinking Lord Royce himself, if that pleases your Grace. He's guided the Vale through many hardships. I'm still learning my duties. Royce inclined his head in gratitude and Daenerys agreed. She had heard that Royce was a capable administrator, practical and stern. The presence of men like him on her council would bring a sense of balance. The discussion continued, venturing into topics such as trade routes between the Vale and the Crownlands, the security of certain mountain passes, and potential alliances. Robin tried to keep up, though he frequently cast glances at Daenerys's hair, or at Grey Worm, or toward the open roof, presumably imagining a dragon swooping in at any moment. At last, the official matters concluded. Daenerys rose, smoothing her gown. If you wish to see Drogon, we can ride out now while the sun is high. Robin brightened like a child offered a sweet. Truly, your Grace? Daenerys nodded, leading them out of the gallery. The city streets were busy as usual, but parted for the Queen's retinue. Robin looked around with a mixture of fascination and dismay at the signs of war damage. He whispered to Royce, loud enough for Daenerys to hear, that King's Landing looked better than rumored. Daenerys considered that a quiet success. They exited through the gates, moving up a winding road into the hills. There, Drogon lazed under the midday sun, curled on a rocky ledge with a vantage over the city. Robin's mouth fell open when he beheld the dragon's massive shape. Royce and the knights behind him murmured in awe. Drogon lifted his head, golden eyes narrowing, then rose with a slow, powerful motion. Lord Robin's horse skittered in fear, and Daenerys raised a soothing hand. She dismounted and approached Drogon, placing a hand on his flank as she had done so many times. He let out a puff of heated breath, but remained calm. Daenerys glanced back at Robin. Come, stand beside me. Move slowly and do not show fear. Robin looked as though he might faint, but the desire to witness a dragon up close prevailed over his anxiety. He slid off his horse, swallowing hard, and stepped forward. The closer he got, the more his breathing quickened. Daenerys guided his hand, placing it gently on one of Drogon's scales. The dragon rumbled a low note but did not recoil. The boy lord's eyes shone in wonder. He's so warm, Robin murmured, pressing his palm against the scale. He's alive in a way I never imagined. He turned to Daenerys. Your Grace, I can scarcely believe you command such a creature. Daenerys offered a faint smile. He's not a mere creature. He's my child, the last of three. She spoke the words quietly, remembering the heartbreak of losing Rhaegal and Viserion. But yes, we have a bond. He is an extension of my will, and I of his. Robin withdrew his hand, stepping back as Drogon snorted and shifted. Daenerys raised a hand in farewell, and the dragon settled again, lowering his head in an almost regal fashion. Lord Royce and the knights kept their distance, uncertain whether they dared approach. They returned to the city, the Vale's retinue abuzz with excitement. Lord Royce assured Daenerys that such a display would solidify the Vale's resolve to support her, for it was clear she had the might of dragons but was not wantonly cruel with it. Daenerys took comfort in that. Sometimes a demonstration of power, controlled and measured, was enough to confirm alliances without bloodshed. Her new council formed soon after. They met in a large courtyard open to the sky with a high stone wall at the perimeter. It was the safest location near the rubble of the Red Keep that could accommodate so many. Chairs were set in a rough circle around a table. The delegates included Sansa Stark for the North, Lord Royce for the Vale, representatives from the Stormlands and the Reach, the Iron Islands, Dorne, and the Crownlands itself. Daenerys presided, with Ser Davos as her de facto hand, though she had yet to formally name him such, and Grey Worm standing as her master of war. There was talk of reassigning him to a different role, for Grey Worm was not comfortable with politics, but for now he remained at her side. Also present was Lady Brienne of Tarth, who would speak for Sansa when the Lady of Winterfell was absent. This council was unlike the old small council where a king or queen sat at the head of a table and gave orders. It was more collaborative, though Daenerys retained final authority. She listened as each region voiced concerns, from trade routes to borders to local disputes with bandits or neighboring lords. She offered resources from the crown's coffers to the hardest-hit areas, including the riverlands that had been ravaged by countless wars. In turn, the lords pledged troops or supplies to keep the realm stable. At times, the discussions were heated. The Iron Islands demanded concessions, including freedom to raid certain coasts. Daenerys refused outright, reminding them that they were no longer a rogue power. Sansa insisted on certain privileges for the North regarding taxes and the movement of southern armies. The lords from the Stormlands bristled, muttering about favoritism. Daenerys handled each matter patiently, forging compromises where possible, standing firm when needed. It was tedious work, but she found it rewarding. Here, in earnest debate, the shape of a new Westeros was taking form, one guided by mutual accountability rather than fear alone. During one such session, a raven arrived bearing a sealed note from the Citadel in Old Town. The Archmasters acknowledged Daenerys as queen and expressed concern about the realm's healing. They invited her to send an emissary to the Citadel for a formal discussion on how best to preserve knowledge and promote scholarship throughout Westeros. Daenerys read the letter aloud to the council and found general support for bridging ties with the learned men. Sansa murmured it might help if we offered to establish new schools or halls of healing in the larger towns. The people are starved not just for bread, but for learning. Daenerys liked the idea. I could devote a portion of the treasury to such efforts. Let's coordinate with the Citadel. If we ensure they have a strong presence in King's Landing and across the realm, it might unify our efforts to educate the small folk. Ser Davos leaned forward, eyeing the letter. In my younger days, I'd never have imagined the folks in Flea Bottom wanting to learn their letters, but times change. If a queen says they can have a future beyond scrounging for scraps, maybe they'll believe it. The council broke with a renewed sense of purpose, each delegate returning to their region with tasks and promises. Daenerys felt a deep fatigue wash over her after they dispersed. She stood in the courtyard, leaning against a pillar where vines clung to shattered stone. Grey Worm approached, concern etched on his face. You push yourself too hard, Your Grace, he said softly. You must rest. These burdens will not vanish overnight. She sighed, looking at him. There's so much to do. Every corner of the realm cries out for attention. And in every shadow, another threat might lurk. Grey Worm nodded. True, but you do not stand alone. Ser Davos, Lady Sansa, these lords, they can help carry the weight. Missandei would have said the same if she were here. A pang of grief touched Daenerys at the mention of Missandei. She placed a hand on Grey Worm's shoulder in silent commiseration. They had both lost her, both carried that scar. After a moment, she forced a small, grateful smile. You're right. I'll rest for a short while. But tomorrow, I intend to inspect the rebuilding efforts near the harbor. Grey Worm accompanied her back through the battered corridors, past a yard where Unsullied drilled, to the tower she temporarily called home. In her chamber, a large room with a collapsed wall exposing half the space to open air, she found a simple cot and a small table. No opulent bed, no golden candelabras as Cersei once possessed. Daenerys removed her boots, let down her hair, and stretched out on the cot. She stared at the cracked ceiling for a long while, letting the day's tension slowly leak from her muscles. She wondered how her ancestors would see her now. A Targaryen queen sleeping in a half-ruined tower, forging alliances with old enemies, refusing to rule by terror. She remembered stories of Aegon the Conqueror who used fire and fear to unite the Seven Kingdoms. She remembered hearing how the Mad King brandished wildfire and madness. She was something else, neither a conqueror nor a tyrant, but a woman forging a new path. Perhaps future singers would compose ballads of the Dragon Queen who destroyed a fortress from within but spared a city. Perhaps they would laud her mercy as well as her might. She hoped so, though she knew the realm's memory could be fickle. Sleep stole over her, bringing half-remembered dreams. She saw Drogon hatching again, felt Missandei's hand in hers, glimpsed the faces of the thousands who had once called her Mysa in Essos. The dream shifted, showing her a golden field, wind rustling tall grasses, the bright sun overhead. She walked barefoot, hearing the distant call of a dragon, scanning the horizon for any sign of threat. In that dream, she felt no fear, only a calm acceptance of what was and what would be. She awoke just after dusk, the sky a deep cobalt beyond the broken wall. The city's lights twinkled in the distance, the hum of activity still audible. Daenerys rose, feeling stiff but clearer in mind. She washed her face in a basin of cool water, changed into a fresh gown, and decided to walk the city by night with a minimal guard. Often, she found it helpful to see the streets in darkness to gauge if people were truly safe. Grey Worm insisted on accompanying her with at least 4 Unsullied, and Daenerys allowed it. They slipped out through a small gate and ventured into King's Landing's winding alleys. Here, torches flickered from iron sconces, illuminating old stone walls covered in soot. Rats darted near refuse piles. The air carried a faint tang of smoke from lingering fires that had never been fully extinguished. Yet the city was alive. She heard laughter from a tavern, saw vendors selling roasted nuts from carts, glimpsed families huddled in doorways. She crossed a district where many refugees had gathered, people displaced from the war, living in makeshift shelters. The queen's presence drew murmurs, and a few recognized her silver hair, stepping back in awe or dropping into ragged bows. Daenerys approached a small group huddled near a guttering torch, a mother and 2 children. Their faces were drawn, clothes threadbare. She asked their names, learned they were from the Riverlands, their farm razed by past battles. They had come to the city seeking shelter, only to find it half-ruined. Daenerys knelt beside them, promising to direct city officials to improve these conditions. She left what small coin she had, though she knew it was far from enough. She pressed on, passing an inn whose sign swung in the night breeze, bearing the chipped image of a barrel. The smell of ale wafted out, along with raucous laughter. A group of men stumbled out, half-drunk, but they froze upon seeing the Unsullied guards. One of them, bleary-eyed, recognized Daenerys. He blinked, muttered an apology, and sank into an awkward bow. Daenerys waved him off with a faint smile. The man stammered, "Forgive me, my queen, I didn't mean no disrespect." She laid a gentle hand on his arm. "Be well, citizen. Enjoy your night. Just see that you do no harm." He bobbed his head, relief flooding his features, and hastened away with his friends. Daenerys entered the inn's common room briefly, scanning the environment. Men and women sat around sturdy tables, some playing dice, others quietly drinking. A hush settled as they noticed her. The innkeeper, a plump woman with a kind face, hurried over, bowing. Daenerys reassured her they only wished to see how business fared. The innkeeper, flustered, confessed that times were still tough but better than a month ago. More travelers were coming with each passing week, and none feared the city would be burned. Daenerys offered a small nod of encouragement. "Continue to keep a fair price for your rooms and ale. Prosperity will return in time." When she left, the hush broke, replaced by a wave of curious chatter. She heard scraps of conversation behind her. "Never thought I'd see a queen walk these streets at night," another voice whispered. "She's different than the last lot, that's for sure." Daenerys felt a ripple of satisfaction. This was what she wanted them to see, that she was not a distant tyrant locked behind fortress walls. As she made her way back toward the higher ground, a commotion broke out. Shouts echoed from a side street, followed by frantic footsteps. Daenerys signaled her guards to investigate. They turned a corner to find 2 men tussling, one brandishing a knife. A woman cowered nearby, crying for help. The man with the blade threatened to cut the other if he did not return some stolen coin. At the sight of the Unsullied, both froze. The man with the knife tried to bolt, but Grey Worm was faster, catching him by the arm. The other man scrambled away, terror in his eyes. Daenerys stepped forward. "What's happened here?" The woman, trembling, explained that she had hired these men to carry a shipment of vegetables from the docks to her stall in the city. When she checked the sacks, a portion was missing. She accused them of stealing. One blamed the other. A scuffle broke out. The knife man was demanding his share, insisting that the woman had no proof. The other man insisted that the knife man had robbed him. In truth, neither seemed innocent. Daenerys took a measured breath. In the old days, a gold cloak might have beaten them both, or a Lannister guard might have thrown them in a dungeon. She wanted a more just approach. "Take them to the nearest magistrate station," she said to Grey Worm. "The woman will come too. We'll let them speak their case. Let an impartial hearing decide guilt and restitution." Grey Worm nodded, ordering 2 Unsullied to escort the trio. The men muttered protestations, but the queen's authority was absolute. Daenerys looked at the woman. "The city will assist you if you've lost your goods, but it must be proven." The woman nodded through her tears, and the small group departed. Daenerys stood in the dim lamplight of that alley for a moment, letting the tension recede. This, too, was part of ruling, answering the small crises of ordinary folk. It was not glamorous, nor would the bards sing of it, but it was essential. She made her way to the tower, escorted by the remaining Unsullied. The night had grown late, the stars half obscured by the glow of the city's many fires. She paused at a vantage point overlooking the silhouette of the collapsed Red Keep. It looked like a jagged scar upon the hill and open wound in the city's flesh. Yet around it, new scaffolding rose, shining in torchlight. Stone blocks had been cleared and foundations for Daenerys' new seat were taking shape. She had not decided on a name for it yet. Some had suggested calling it Aegon's Light, others Dragon's Gate, and still others the People's Palace. She wasn't sure if any name truly fit. She gazed a long time, heart-stirring with a mix of pride and sorrow. She had come to this land with fire in her heart, prepared to burn a city to take the throne. Instead, she had destroyed only the fortress at the heart of tyranny and saved the city around it. The old saying that power resides where men believe it resides came to mind. She wanted that power to reside in justice, in mercy, in the hearts of those who saw her as a protector, not a butcher. The following morning, a raven arrived from the Iron Islands. Lady Yara Greyjoy had reclaimed much of the territory once held by her uncle Euron. Some scattered reavers resisted, but Yara's forces subdued them. She wrote that she would soon sail to King's Landing to solidify her pact with the crown. Daenerys read the letter aloud to Ser Davos, who nodded approvingly. The Iron Islands had long been a thorn for mainlanders, but Yara was pragmatic. If she adhered to the Queen's vision of minimal raids, she could be a valuable ally. That same day, a group of Dornish envoys arrived, bearing casks of wine and fruit from their warm southern fields. They too sought a place on the council. They spoke of how Dorne valued its independence, but could benefit from alliances in trade and mutual defense. Daenerys welcomed them, mindful that Dorne had once warred with her ancestors viciously before forging alliances. Now, it seemed every corner of the realm recognized that unity was more profitable than strife. Still, the days were not without complications. News came from the Westerlands that some minor Lannister branch still claimed a right to rule from Casterly Rock. They had not openly rebelled, but they refused to acknowledge Daenerys' new order. She sent messages offering them a seat at the council. They responded with polite refusals, referencing uncertainty about her rule. Daenerys made a mental note to watch them carefully, not wanting another Ser Aemeric situation to develop. Meanwhile, the building projects in King's Landing continued at a brisk pace. Part of the old city walls needed reinforcements, and the harbor quays had to be repaired. The new seat's foundation was laid out stone by stone, guided by skilled masons under the supervision of an engineer from Pentos who specialized in open-air architecture. Daenerys sometimes visited the site, stepping among scaffolding, conferring with the workers about her vision. She wanted it to be a place where no shadow of dread lingered. Some engineers worried about structural soundness, but she insisted on large arches to let in the sun. No more dark corridors where conspiracies fester, she said. They worked to accommodate her wishes, balancing aesthetics with safety. The city's mood gradually lifted. Bread lines grew shorter as fresh grain arrived from the reach. The new city watch, composed of both unsullied and carefully selected recruits from among the locals, patrolled the streets with discipline. No more random beatings or extortion. Daenerys received word that the pot shops in Flea Bottom were bustling again, people scraping by, yes, but not starving. Every day, the Queen strove to remind herself and her people that this was how a realm was truly won, through care, not conquest. One evening, a surprise visitor came to her tower, Lady Brienne of Tarth requesting a private audience. Daenerys welcomed her into the dimly lit room where she sat behind a simple desk, scanning reams of parchment detailing tax levies. Brienne removed her helm, revealing her short-cropped hair, and saluted. "Your Grace, I come with a matter that concerns the North, but it also touches upon the Targaryen legacy." Daenerys set aside the parchments. "Go on." Brienne's voice was steady, though her pale blue eyes flickered with the gravity of what she had to say. "I've received letters from certain northern lords who harbor resentment over the war. They question if the North should remain part of the realm or follow its old tradition of kings. Lady Sansa is trying to quell such talk, but it persists. Some hold to the memory of your father, the Mad King, who burned the Stark patriarch and demanded Ned Stark bend the knee." Daenerys felt a stab of old shame and sorrow. "I am not my father. I swore I would not follow his path." Brienne inclined her head. "I know, and Lady Sansa knows. But many are stubborn or bitter. They recall how the North was its own kingdom before Aegon's conquest. Now, with the realm weakened, they see a chance to break away. Sansa does not desire war, nor does she truly want the North to separate, but she faces pressure. She asked me to bring this matter to your attention discreetly so we might find a solution." Daenerys rose, pacing near the open section of wall. The night air brushed her skin. She understood the North's pride. She also understood that forcibly holding them would breed resentment. Does Sansa propose a compromise? Brienne nodded. She suggests affirming certain freedoms for the North, a permanent understanding that no southern army will march there without the express invitation of its ruling council except in the case of dire realm-wide emergencies. Also, she wants recognition of the North's right to manage its own internal affairs, tribunals, local taxes without southern interference. Daenerys considered it carefully. It was a large concession, but if it kept the North in the realm peacefully, she saw little harm. I can agree as long as they don't withhold taxes that the crown relies on for realm-wide projects. And if a threat arises that endangers all of Westeros, they must stand with me. That is non-negotiable. Brienne smiled, relieved. I believe Lady Sansa would find that acceptable. May I send word? Daenerys returned the smile. Yes. Tell her I look forward to formalizing these terms. Let the North remain part of the realm, proud and free, but allied under a single monarchy. Brienne placed her fist over her heart in salute. You show great wisdom, Your Grace. I'll write to her at once. After she left, Daenerys lingered by the opening in the tower wall, gazing at the stars. Each challenge seemed to ask, how do you keep a realm as diverse as Westeros united without resorting to raw fear? The answer, she was learning, lay in compromise, respect, and earnest dialogue. Her father had tried to rule through terror. He had died consumed by flames of his own making. She wanted a different legacy. Time pressed on. Tensions eased, though pockets of discontent remained. Yara Greyjoy arrived, solidifying her alliance by swearing fealty in person, though she made it clear the Iron Islands would never be docile farmland. Daenerys accepted that. The Dornish envoys returned to offer a treaty of mutual trade. The Vale's presence in the capital grew as Lord Royce took part in more council sessions. Sansa Stark continued to rule the North from Winterfell, sending Brienne south to represent her. The City Watch expanded with new recruits. Crime dipped. Merchant ships multiplied in the harbor. The lines of reconstruction advanced each day. Daenerys learned to delegate, trusting Ser Davos, Grey Worm, and others to handle many day-to-day matters. She focused on key decisions, issuance of new laws, allotment of treasury funds for major projects, forging alliances with lords who needed personal attention. She kept up the habit of walking the city, sometimes with only a small guard. More and more, she heard people call her the Dragon Queen with something like pride. They remembered how she had spared them, how she had demanded no slaughter in the streets. Some began to speak of her new seat as a symbol of hope. The final shape of the building took form, with high, sweeping arches and open courtyards. It was not yet complete, but the skeleton rose as a promise that King's Landing would not revert to old tyrannies. Amid all these victories, she never forgot the losses that had brought her here, Jorah, Missandei, her fallen dragons, even Jon Snow, wherever he might be. Each absence weighed on her in quiet moments, reminding her that every gain in power exacted a personal price. Yet she pressed on, determined to do justice to the faith they had shown in her. She would not squander what had been purchased with their lives. A year passed in this manner, an eventful year that saw Westeros begin to knit itself back together. Spring arrived with a flourish of blossoms in the crownlands, the orchards heavy with pink and white petals. The roads filled with travelers once more, caravans of goods flowing from region to region. The city grew louder, merrier, with celebrations of small triumphs. A new guild hall opened, a replaced bridge dedicated, a festival to mark the forging of peace. Daenerys did not claim credit for every improvement, nor did she allow the court to become complacent. She reminded everyone that there was always more work to be done. Heal the scars of the war, feed the hungry, punish evildoers through lawful courts, not indiscriminate vengeance. On the anniversary of the day she took King's Landing, Daenerys stood atop a tall viewing platform near the rising palace. The scaffolding was now thick with carpenters and masons who hammered at stone and timber. She could see much of the city from here, the sprawl of rooftops, the tangle of streets, the shining curve of Blackwater Bay where ships crowded the docks. She remembered how she once looked upon the city with burning rage, determined to conquer it in a single fiery stroke. Instead, she had found a way to break the seed of power without destroying the place or its people. Her lips curved into a small, pensive smile. Grey Worm stood beside her, silent as he often was, wearing the polished armor of the royal guard. A gentle breeze ruffled Daenerys' hair. She breathed in the sense of sawdust and fresh mortar. This was progress measured not by how many enemies she slew, but by how many homes were rebuilt, how many children grew up unafraid. It was not the story she once imagined. Hers was no simple heroic conquest, no savage vengeance satisfied. It was a daily struggle for stability, for cooperation, for a lasting peace that might just outlive her. Perhaps that was the challenge that truly mattered. She asked Grey Worm quietly, "Do you think Missandei would be proud?" He looked out over the city, a softness in his eyes. Yes. She believed in a queen who would do more than just free the enslaved. She believed you would heal a broken realm. He paused, voice thick with emotion. She'd say you were honoring that faith. Daenerys placed a hand on his forearm, a silent thank you. She let her gaze wander to the horizon where the line of the sea met the sky. A gull cried overhead. She could imagine the world beyond, the free cities of Essos, the deserts of Dorne, the snows of the north. All part of a tapestry she was trying to hold together. That evening, she declared a feast to honor the workers who had rebuilt large sections of the city. Trestle tables lined a wide plaza near the site of her future palace. Cookfires and lanterns lit the area, the air filled with music from fiddles and flutes. People from all walks of life, masons, carpenters, tailors, blacksmiths, innkeepers, came to dine and dance under the open sky. Soldiers mingled with civilians, an unfamiliar but pleasing sight. Daenerys herself moved through the crowd, greeting them, laughing when someone insisted she taste a new pastry recipe or try a sip of spiced cider. She watched children chase each other around the half-finished columns of the palace courtyard, squealing with delight. At one point, she noticed a small group of older folk sitting near a brazier looking on with uncertain eyes. Some had the haunted look of those who had lost family during the war. She approached them gently, asked how they fared. One man admitted he still found it hard to trust the new queen, even after all the improvements, because he had seen too many broken promises. Daenerys accepted his distrust, telling him he had every right to be cautious, but she would continue working to prove herself. Another, a woman with a lined face and trembling hands, said her granddaughter had perished when the keep collapsed. She did not blame Daenerys outright, but she couldn't bring herself to celebrate while her kin lay in a grave. Daenerys knelt beside her, sorrow etched in her features. "I cannot bring her back," she murmured. "But I can learn from every loss, so no more must die needlessly." The woman nodded tearfully, perhaps uncertain whether to forgive or not. Daenerys stayed with her a moment longer, listening. She rose with a heavy heart, reminded yet again that even the best intentions carried costs. As the feast wore on, the music grew livelier, dancers spun in circles, ale flowed, and for a night, King's Landing felt truly at peace. Near the largest bonfire, Daenerys spotted Sansa Stark and Ser Davos deep in conversation with a few lords, presumably plotting some realm-wide trade agreement. Sansa caught Daenerys' eye and gave her a cordial nod, which Daenerys returned. There was still a careful distance between them, but at least it was no longer animosity. From the darkness beyond the bonfires came a familiar roar, and people gasped. Drogon soared overhead, outlined by the firelight, a massive silhouette passing across the sky. He did not come too close, only circled once, as if to acknowledge the gathering. Then he glided away toward the hills. Many of those present gazed up in awe, some in apprehension, some in wonder. Daenerys watched him with a pang of pride, recalling how easily she could have unleashed him upon the city. Instead, he flew as a guardian, not an executioner. A hush fell, then the music resumed, more joyful than before, as if the city recognized that the dragon was not there to burn them but to watch over them. When the night was deep and the festivities waned, Daenerys slipped away to stand at the far edge of the plaza, looking down at the Blackwater Bay. Torches dotted the docks, and a scatter of lanterns bobbed on small fishing boats. The wind from the sea carried the scent of salt. She closed her eyes, letting the moment settle in her chest. She could almost hear voices from the past, her brother Viserys ranting about his birthright, Drogo promising the gift of a golden crown, Yora calling her Khaleesi, Missandei whispering her unwavering support, Tyrion cautioning her about ruling with wisdom. All of them had shaped her journey in ways she could not deny. She missed them, even those she had grown to loathe, for they had been pieces of the puzzle that led her here. She opened her eyes and looked toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, beyond the starlit waters, lay the future of this realm. She wondered if, in a decade or two, King's Landing would become a beacon of prosperity, or if new threats would arise to challenge her fragile unity. All she knew was that she would face each challenge as she had from the beginning, with the determination to protect the innocent and the willingness to show mercy where she could, but also the strength to stand against those who would plunge the realm back into chaos. In that quiet reflection, Daenerys Targaryen felt no illusions of perfection. She was not a saint, nor a god, nor a mere conqueror. She was a woman who had once walked through fire to liberate slaves, who had ridden dragons to overthrow tyrants, who had learned the cost of war and the power of restraint. She had destroyed the Red Keep from within, proving to the world, and perhaps most of all to herself, that she could wield Dragonfire without succumbing to madness. The city breathed because she had chosen a different path, and now she would nurture that breath day after day, forging a realm that might finally know peace. She turned from the bay and walked back to the glow of the bonfires. The music embraced her again, along with the tapestry of voices. Soldiers, stonemasons, farmers, merchants, children, this motley collection was the living heart of her kingdom. She smiled, a true smile this time, and let the moment envelop her. Whatever trials the future held, she would face them with her head high, her convictions firm, and the memory of those who had sacrificed everything urging her onward. This was how she would rule, with fire in her veins but mercy in her heart, determined to be the queen her people deserved.